Okay, good morning, everyone. At least good morning from where I'm speaking to you all from. We're about to get started with today's session, and I would just like to come on to do a bit of housekeeping and take us through a little bit of an activity this morning before we kick off officially. I'd like to first let everyone know that we are offering simultaneous interpretation for today's event. So if you feel like you're going to need interpretation either from English to French or French to English, we have a couple headsets and receivers at the far end of the room at the back. The English channel is on number 1, and then the French channel is on number 2. So please, at any point during the session, if you feel like you need those services, feel free to step to the back of the room to grab your headset. And then also for those joining us online, you should be able to find the option on the Zoom link as well to be able to select the language channel that you want to receive as the session is going on. Another information I'd like to share to our guests who are joining us online, we just kindly ask that you keep your microphones and your videos off in the meantime while the main session and presentations are going on. And then there'll be opportunities to interact during the breakout group sessions I'll be having later in the day. And then specifically on the breakout groups, what we're asking the participants who are joining us online is to please indicate EN beside your name if you'd like to participate in the breakout groups in English. If you're interested and would like to participate in an English discussion, English-focused language group, please rename yourself on Zoom and put EN beside your name. And similarly, if you would like to participate with French being a predominant language of yours, please specify FR beside your name as well. We'll give further details closer to the breakout group discussion time to also reiterate instructions. So please, again, if you are interested, make sure that you make that note on the Zoom chats. That will help us to be able to divide up the groups accordingly. And finally here, I would like us to go through a series of questions just so we can get a temperature of everyone who is joining us, those who are in the room, those who are online, so we can just get a little bit of a feel of people who are joining us and where you're joining us from. So momentarily on the screen, you should see details of a menti.com. So I think we had already started off with our participants who were online. So to those of you in the room, please pull out your phones, go to menti.com. We just like to get a bit of responses from everyone here. The code to join the Mentimeter is 333-656-93. So I'll give people a bit of time to join the Mentimeter. So yeah, I'll give you a bit of time. Once you're in there, you can give me a little wave. You don't have to put your hand up too high, just so I can know who is in there. So I think the first question that we had here, we were just asking people to share with us what sectors that they work in. And I think we can see some of the responses already coming in. A lot of emphasis on international development, gender equality, environment, climate change, sustainability, university, I'm seeing, research, women empowerment, I'm seeing as well, inclusion, yeah, so food systems I saw as well. So yeah, if you haven't already done so, please just join the Mentimeter. We can go on to the next question. And now we'd just like to ask, what network is your organization a part of? Are you coming from the federal government? Are you coming from C4D, from FSPG, or you're coming from another group? So just let us know where you're joining us from today. The Partnering for Climate group, working with the government. I see a lot of people coming from other sectors as except for the ones who are already identified on here. And then we can move on to the next question as well. Now we're asking, does your organization identify as any of the following? So the first option we have here is a women's organization. The second option here is a human rights organization. The third option we have here is an organization with expertise in gender equality and social inclusion. Or are you coming from a totally different background as well? We just like to get an understanding of where people are coming from. I see there's a lot of emphasis with people coming with a GESI background, so that's good to see as well. And then on to the next question. So specifically, what is your experience with nature-based solutions for adaptation? Is this something that is new to you? Are you familiar with it, but maybe not direct experience? Maybe you've done research in this area, or you've participated in projects in this area, so please just let us know. A lot of participation in projects, and then a few people, it's a topic that's familiar to them, but maybe no direct experience specifically. And then for the last question, we'd like to know, what is your experience with adaptation initiatives that advance gender equality and social inclusion? Similar concept, is this new to you? Some familiarity, maybe you've done a bit of research on it, or maybe you've participated in projects related to gender equality and social inclusion. I see a lot of responses as skewing towards participating within those projects. So nevertheless, we hope that today's session will be an informative one for everyone who is participating, be it an experience you've had directly or not, but we just hope that you're taking notes, being attentive to the presentations, engaging in the discussion questions, the World Cafe sessions, and we'll hope to have a fruitful conversation today. And to just get started off, to help us give a bit of introduction to today's session, I'd like to welcome to the stage Rosemary Quipp, who is the Deputy Director of Public Engagement and Resource Mobilization here at AKFC. So let's give Rosemary a warm round of applause.
Good morning, everyone, or maybe good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from in the world, and welcome. My name is Rosemary Quipp, and I'm the Deputy Director of Public Engagement and Resource Mobilization here at Aga Khan Foundation in Canada. So it's my pleasure to welcome both our in-person and our virtual participants to the delegation of the Ismaili Imamate, and to extend my deep respect to the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose unceded ancestral lands we are gathering on today. We're grateful for the stewardship and courage of elders and traditional knowledge keepers, past, present, and future. We make this acknowledgement to reaffirm our commitment to strengthening relationships, improving our own understanding of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people and culture across Canada, Turtle Island, critically examining our privilege, and moving forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. We recognize that since time immemorial, the Algonquin peoples have been coming together at this place where the three rivers meet in a spirit of exchange, of goods and services, but also of relations and ideas. And so we seek to continue that centuries-old tradition of sharing and exchanging ideas and building relationships. Today, we will build on an ongoing series of discussions on advancing nature-based climate solutions, with today's session particularly focused on mainstreaming gender equality and social inclusion. We do so in partnership with Global Affairs Canada and the International Institute for Sustainable Development, with whom we share an interest in supporting opportunities for Canadian CSOs, as well as other practitioners and advocates, to learn, exchange ideas, and build capacity related to climate adaptation and resilience. I'd also like to specifically recognize Global Affairs Canada as the convener of the Nature-Based Solutions and Biodiversity Community of Practice session this afternoon. And we warmly welcome our panelists, who have kindly offered to share the experience of their organizations in implementing nature-based initiatives that support gender equality and social inclusion objectives. So we're very pleased to co-host this event and have you all here today, as gender equality and social inclusion forms a crux of Aga Khan Foundation's institutional and programmatic work globally. To tell you more about this work, I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Jennifer Elms, our Regional Gender Equality Advisor for AKF Canada and AKF USA. Yes, give her applause too.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome, bienvenue. Thank you for the introductory remarks, Rosemary. As Rosemary has said, gender equality and social inclusion are at the heart of our work, ensuring that programs reflect the intersecting identities of equity-deserving groups that we work with across AKF geographies. AKF's gender equality and safeguarding policies outline a demonstrated commitment to inclusive practices that ensure our organization is cultivating an equitable, inclusive, and safe environment for staff, stakeholders, partners, and beneficiaries or participants. Globally, AKF has developed technical tools and guidance available on our online learning hub, shameless plug, which provide further leadership on gender mainstreaming, gender analysis, and integrating gender across the project cycle. This is based on decades of lessons learned during implementation across the geographies in which we partner, all to optimize and sustain impact. Environmental sustainability and climate change remain a pressing issue, as we all know, and AKF promotes multi-sectoral approaches that not only address barriers that women and equity-deserving groups face, but also cross-cut climate change-related initiatives affecting AKF geographies around the globe. To provide an overview of the Global Affairs Canada's climate and gender equality and social inclusion finance commitments, I am very pleased to hand over to Kerry Max, Senior Advisor, Climate Finance Partnerships at Global Affairs Canada. Kerry is the Deputy Director of Partnering for Climate at Global Affairs Canada. He has over 30 years of experience in international development, research, practice, policy, and programming that includes climate action, private sector development, trade, investment development, finance, and project management. He currently focuses on promoting gender-responsive climate action, partnerships, and mobilizing private sector investment to support climate change mitigation and adaptation. He works out of the Global Affairs Canada's Partnerships for Development Innovation branch to advise on these partnerships under the Partnering for Climate initiative. Please give a warm welcome to Kerry Max.
Merci tout le monde. Thank you, everyone. We're just going to get the deck up, yeah? Okay. The idea here was, while we're going to be focusing on gender equality and social inclusion, for the few of you in the room who haven't already heard this now 4 or 5 times, we want to make sure that you're aware of the overall context of Canada's commitments to these issues and Canada's overall climate finance commitments. So in terms of, before I get into the actual climate finance structure that we're working within here, I just want to make everyone aware of sort of the 3 major drivers right now in terms of the biodiversity commitments, the G7 Nature Compact, and of course the Paris Agreement, where we had committed to doing as much as we can to achieve the Paris objectives, including supporting the $100 billion climate finance target for developing countries. Alors, dans notre programme de 5,3 milliards, qui représente un double
in 3 billions, that doubles the compromise that was done on the previous year. We have the associated more than 40% of the grants towards adaptation, environmental adaptation. From that, we have $1 billion that is going to be used on answers, on solutions that are going to be positive for the nature. And you're going to see that 80% of the projects must integrate gender equality.
So the Partnering for Climate facility that you're aware of, the initiative that you're aware of, and a number of you in the room are actually participating in rolling out, had 2 major elements: $300 million for sub-Saharan Africa. Hold on, I gotta have the French up while I'm talking in English. And $15 million for an Indigenous peoples partnership for climate that is currently being co-created and co-led. And we'll follow up with that the next time we're talking about the community of practice at International Development Week. Spoiler for a future point that I'll give. But the idea behind Partnering for Climate was, in addition to the finance, the 300 million for Sub-Saharan Africa and the 15 million for Indigenous peoples, that there would be a dedicated outreach and engagement component that is represented by this meeting. And then in terms of gender equality and social inclusion, seulement pour vous donner un aperçu global, bien sûr, on a la politique d'aide internationale.
To give you an overview, we have the Feminist International Assistance Policy, where we are incorporating the comparative analysis in between sexes and the approach based on human rights. And also we have partners using the IUCN Global Standard to ensure the inclusion with simple criterias. And inside of the 300 millions, we have at least 20 millions exclusively dedicated to solutions based on gender equality and nature.
Quick overview, this represents 15 of our 16 approved Partnering for Climate projects. The 16th will hopefully be announced on the 4th of November, and then we will be fully capable of talking transparently about everything we're doing. But in the meantime, you're going to get 90% of that over the course of the next few hours. Merci beaucoup.
All right, thanks so much, Kerry. We'll queue up the slides. So my name is Calais Caswell. I'm a Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Policy Advisor for IISD and supporting the NCAI program that we're here to talk about today. Are they coming? Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about what the NCAI objectives are and a little bit of unpacking, I think, about some of the terminology we're going to talk about today to kind of set the stage for the discussion. So the Nature for Climate Adaptation Initiative seeks to enhance global North and global South civil society organizations' understanding, knowledge capacity to design and deliver nature-based climate solutions for adaptation that provide biodiversity and livelihood benefits to people of all genders and social groups in developing countries. The NCAI aims to equip CSOs and practitioners involved in international development with the knowledge to design compelling proposals, pursue projects, programs, and partnerships that will unleash the full potential of nature in confronting the climate crisis. The NCAI endeavors to create an environment for accelerated action on NbS, or nature-based solutions, which you'll be hearing a lot about today, for adaptation while promoting gender equality and social inclusion, or GESI, so we're going to be using that acronym quite a bit, the rights of Indigenous peoples, and positive outcomes for biodiversity and ecosystems. And with that, there are three sort of core tools that the NCAI is using, this conversation being one of them. We have a self-paced accessible e-learning course that was developed in partnership with GIZ as well as IUCN. And it also includes a module on gender and NbS, which I think was mentioned to those who are participating today. There's an online learning space that has technical guidance, resources, and case studies. There's a technical brief that's coming out soon, which was the basis really for this event. It provides an overview of GESI and NbS concepts and includes practical tips and tools for integrating a GESI lens throughout an NbS project. There's also original case studies that will be coming out in association with that brief. And they provide examples on how NbS initiatives have considered GESI in their implementation. And finally, there's the community of practice, which was already mentioned, which includes diverse practitioners from a range of organizations, both international and domestic, and it provides a space for learning how different organizations tackle issues such as GESI in their NbS programming. So the team has tried to consider gender and diversity within the aims of NCAI to improve our reach to different types of learners and groups of learners to ensure that the outputs and resources are accessible.
We received feedback from participants at the first NCAI and GESI and NbS event, which was titled Advancing Gender Responsive Nature-Based Climate Solutions. This was last October, so a year ago. And it was mentioned by folks who attended that they appreciated having diverse case study presentations that provided practical examples, as well as having a hybrid approach in order to engage with the material. And with sufficient time for discussion. So we've tried to build in lots of time to have discussions today about what we're learning. And the team wanted to build on this discussion and provide even more practical examples. So you'll see some of that coming up in the case study presenters that will be speaking to their work. So we can skip a couple slides. One more, and one more, there we go. So just to kind of demonstrate how we've been sort of trying to think about our data and how our reach is looking in terms of our impact on different groups. So we have some gender disaggregated data that we've been able to pull, and we're looking to improve this as much as possible and be able to collect a disaggregated kind of landscape of how people are reaching the resources of NCAI. So you can skip over to the next slide. So because there's a lot of terminology in this space, I'm going to unpack some of this now. So NbS, or nature-based solutions, are an umbrella term that describe a wide suite of actions to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use, and manage natural or modified terrestrial, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystems, which address social, economic, and environmental challenges effectively and adaptively, while simultaneously providing human well-being, ecosystem services, resilience, and biodiversity benefits. And the second term, GESI, which we've been saying quite a bit, in the context of climate change adaptation, people who face discrimination on the basis of gender, sexual orientation, racialization, indigeneity, disability, or age, among many other factors, are more likely to suffer from the impacts of climate change and conflict, and are less likely to benefit from investments in resilience building. Gender equality and social inclusion, or GESI, can be seen as principles or objectives of this work, where we are moving from a strictly gender-focused approach to adaptation to the incorporation of intersectional approaches to adaptation, so considering all these other diverse identities. If we don't advance GESI as a fundamental element of resilience, we risk leaving people behind. The other term that's been mentioned a couple of times is equity-deserving groups, populations who face barriers to participating in society due to systemic or structural discrimination on the basis of gender, age, racialization, disability, indigeneity, sexual orientation, or some other factors. Gender responsive and socially inclusive NbS, a mouthful, approaches that seek to improve the ability of equity-deserving groups to manage climate risks while protecting and enhancing biodiversity, with consideration for how gender norms, roles, and behaviors may enable or inhibit their ability to do so. It recognizes the differences in needs, access to resources, participation, and opportunities, and that these must be meaningfully mainstreamed or integrated into the planning and implementation of NbS to enable an equitable distribution of benefits. And finally, GESI mainstreaming, which is the act of integrating these approaches, these gender-responsive and inclusive approaches, at all stages of a climate adaptation initiative in order to advance GESI. So we can skip over to the next slide. So for the next couple of minutes, I'll provide an overview of some of the key messages and takeaways from the technical brief that I mentioned, which is coming out, which makes the case for why GESI dynamics should be considered within NbS programming. We know that the impacts of climate and biodiversity crises on people's livelihoods and opportunities differ greatly based on their gender and other intersecting identity factors. Populations that face systemic marginalization and discrimination are more disproportionately affected. This messaging is echoed within the P4C initiative, which Kerry mentioned, and is also undergirded and supported by the Feminist International Assistance Policy, or the FIAP, which was also mentioned, which emphasized the urgent nature of considering gender-responsive climate action. And additionally, for the first time, the IPCC's sixth assessment report that came out in 2022 on climate change indicated that equity and justice should be considered key climate change adaptation concepts, underscoring that these principles cannot be advanced without attention to the adaptive capacity and differentiated risks experienced by vulnerable people. Moreover, it's important to acknowledge that equity-deserving groups are not just vulnerable victims of climate change and biodiversity loss, and that many have unique and specialized knowledge concerning climate adaptation and these issues that should be respected and leveraged in NbS initiatives through meaningful engagement processes. So we hope to speak more to that today. So we can go to the next slide. In terms of some benefits and challenges that have been identified, evidence and select case studies presented have demonstrated the value of considering GESI as well as principles of a human rights-based approach to development to further the goals of climate justice that can generate both GESI and biodiversity co-benefits for local populations. Further, there are possible risks that implementing partners might encounter if GESI elements are not meaningfully integrated, including the risk of incurring maladaptation, as well as worsening inequalities and risks overall to conservation success in a project. Nevertheless, despite the benefits and the risks, as well as the policy commitments and support within the adaptation community, there's limited evidence that GESI considerations have been systematically integrated into NbS programming. So the technical brief and associated case studies that were mentioned, as well as this learning event and others, are an attempt to kind of address this gap. You can go to the next slide. So there are several different GESI frameworks that have been designed to guide climate adaptation and NbS programming efforts. And common to many of these frameworks are three foundational and interconnected elements that comprise a gender-responsive approach to NbS for adaptation, which we're going to speak to now. Differences in gender and intersecting identity factors, as we've discussed, mean that different groups have varying needs and capacities in relation to NbS. For example, differential access to natural resources required for sustainable livelihood strategies, access to finance, or specialized training to implement NbS, among others. These differences must be acknowledged and addressed through assessment and the development of targeted actions, which we'll be speaking about today. Decision-making for NbS includes planning and implementation strategies, as well as natural resources governance. Across all decision-making processes and mechanisms, efforts are required to ensure that equity and the inclusion of underrepresented voices are there and involved in leadership roles as well. NbS policies and projects should be designed and implemented to ensure that the socio-ecological and economic benefits gained from these interventions are distributed equitably across these groups. And the design and operationalization of MEL, Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning, an acronym many of us probably already know, is essential to ensure that this equity is assessed in the outcomes of these interventions, and that equity-deserving groups are able to provide perspectives on what is working well and where things could be improved. And we can skip to the next slide. Thank you. And within the technical brief and the discussions and events that we'll be talking about today, we'll be exploring how these concept tools and approaches can be applied within the life cycle of an NbS initiative. So this image here is from the Convention in Biological Diversity. It was also explored in the e-learning course that was mentioned. And during the Biodiversity NbS event that took place in June, and in the technical brief, we tried to map the similar themes across the life cycle image, which folks who in the implementation sector are very well aware of. If you can click it one more time, there should be an overlay. Perfect, thank you. So this image is an attempt to demonstrate, which is explored further in the brief, how GESI can be considered at various stages within the life cycle. So from the very introduction of the planning process in doing your initial analysis, through to doing a more fulsome risk and vulnerability assessment, then allowing you to prioritize gender responsive and inclusive options for operationalizing, and then allowing that to go all the way through to your monitoring evaluation, which is really a cyclical process. So more to say there once the brief is ready, and we'll be exploring this, as I mentioned, throughout the day. And I think that's it. Thanks very much, everybody. Perfect. So I have the distinct pleasure of being able to introduce some of our presenters. We'll be doing a series of snapshots of case studies, and our presenters today are mostly online, so we'll start with them. So we have our two to start, if they're queued up. Hirondina Mondlane and Sergio Queiroz, both from AKF Mozambique, joining us today. So I'll just give a little brief intro of the two of them. Ms. Mondlane offers over 20 years of experience in political and socioeconomic development, more specifically working with gender-sensitive civil society participatory governance, food security, and agricultural development programs in Mozambique. She currently holds the position of program coordinator at AKF Mozambique, supporting planning, implementation, and reporting of projects. And Mr. Queiroz offers over 14 years of experience working in community development, agriculture and food security, agricultural marketing, agri-food processing, and has recently embraced the area of climate resilience. Currently, he is holding the position of manager of 2 activities within food security and climate resilience at AKF Mozambique. And so we'll be hearing from them. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, good afternoon from our side. Yes, I'm Hirondina Mondlane and I'm here with my colleague Sergio as per the introduction. So in the next 5 minutes or so, we'll try to share with you the NbS Gender Transformative initiative that we implemented here in Mozambique at Ilha de Mozambique in Nampula province. I will start by providing a background information and then talk about the approach, present some results and challenges and lessons. So next slide, please. As you know, Mozambique is a poor country and is highly prone to natural disasters. 80% of the coastal families, they rely on natural resources for their livelihoods. And the population projections indicate that in next 20 years, 6 million of Mozambican population will be living in the coastal areas. And 50% of those will be in the 2 provinces where we are operating. So this shows that there will be a natural resource and with more biodiversity degradation. And as you know, from there we go to climate change and increase in terms of vulnerability of people. The Mozambican island, where we are piloting this intervention, it's an island that emerged from an erosion process. And if nothing is done, this island is at risk of disappearing. So through our work on civil society and through consultation with the local communities, they brought to us this concern. And we also learned that the culture there, it used to promote unhealthy masculinities. So women were only allowed to go out and fetch wood for cooking or collecting marine resources as well for cooking. They were not really empowered to engage in economic activities. So that's when we designed this approach, where we promoting men growth beekeeping we started with 10 female associations. So next slide, please. Our approach was to use what we call village development organization. These are local structures that we promote at the community so that they can coordinate development aspects. So they do this structure helped us to engage men and convince them to allow women to participate in the project activities. We started, as I said, with 10 associations. We provided training on conservation, but also on beekeeping. So they started to engage in educational campaigns, mangrove restoration campaigns. They also started to produce honey. Yes. Next slide, please. We are seeing today veterans engaged with 446 female members and 167 male members. The women are using the income from beekeeping, to start Saving Loans Association that are promoting other micro businesses in that area. And we have already restored 52 hectares of mangrove, and we are protecting 450 hectares of mangrove forest. In terms of change, we are seeing, not only about knowledge, but we are also seeing that women are engaging in income generation activities, and the number is growing. But the most surprising change that we have is that we are seeing community leaders, asking women to allow them to be part of the income generation activity. So for us, this is really transforming when you see a community leader being under the leadership of our women. So that's a good result. And the other result is that the district government as well approached us and asked us to replicate that pilot, and they designated the areas where these women are working as community protected areas. So they are really valuing the work that the women are doing there. In terms of challenges, of course, we live in northern area of Mozambique. Is the most highly prone to natural disasters. There is a conflict ongoing, and there are plagues usually. So people are more reactive than proactive. It's difficult for them to engage in something for prevention. They are more used to respond than to prevent. We are trying to shift that mindset. Information is not easily accessible, and also the market is weak. If we are supporting to diversification of income generation activity, we are hoping that they will get a better market, but still a challenge. But we learned that the more we diversify the income generation activities, the better income they get, and the more encouraged they are in protecting, the ecosystem where they are working. And also we learned that it's important to coach when you are introducing a natural base, a new initiative which is based on nature. It's important to coach the target group from training to production up to access to market, so that at least you have a cycle of learning, you have evidence that they can use, to convince others, but also they have opportunity to expand and get more income with that. And last but not least, we also learned that promoting saving culture is key for sustainability. Now women, we are almost at the end of the initiative, but women are now planning to buy more beehives, expand that area, because they have the rotative credit that they have created with the income they got. And thank you.
Thank you, Hirondina and Sergio. Excellent snapshot to get us started off. We'll be moving on to our next presenter, who's Emily Wylde. So Emily Wylde is the Senior Technical Specialist for Targeting and Social Inclusion at IFAD's Gender Team, part of the Environment, Climate, Gender, and Social Inclusion Division, and is based in West and Central Africa Regional Office in Abidjan. She is an economist with an emphasis on poverty analysis, microsimulations, and impact evaluations, as well as public financial management and value for money. In her current role, in addition to targeting, she currently supports work on disability inclusion. Thank you so much, Emily. Take it from here.
Thanks very much, and hello to everybody from Abidjan. My slides are really just images. I'll just show the case studies all in the text that I'll be reading, or that we'll be saying. So go ahead and just move the slides over every minute or so. So this case study is on the Rural Sustainable Development Project in the semi-arid region of Bahia in Brazil, the PSA, which was implemented between 2014 and 2022. And this empowered vulnerable rural populations to live in harmony with their environment and build resilience in the face of climate change. Through the adoption of an agroecological approach, the PSA sought to bolster the productive capacity of small-scale family farms and promote new opportunities to generate income through the transformation and processing of agricultural products, as well as stimulate greater access to the beneficiary population through their work. So to contribute to rural poverty reduction, the project particularly supported the development of human and social capital, placing particular emphasis on women and youth. And an important aspect of the strategy for increasing productivity was the promotion of agrobiodiversity, and it did this in a few ways. So one of these was through activities directed specifically at women, was the promotion of highly diverse and inclusive backyard gardens, where products such as vegetables and fruit trees, as well as aviculture, small livestock rearing, were practiced, all using endemic species adapted to the local conditions. And the gardens were also associated with social technologies, which are vital for building the resilience of the local population. And so this included cisterns to capture rainwater for human consumption and production, and the reuse of grey water systems, providing critical water security to families. So a few other activities, won't go into detail on these, but it was support was also provided to Creole seed and breed program operating in 30 territories of rural Bahia to really for the multiplication, conservation, and sustainable use of these local varieties, which are adapted to the semi-arid conditions. The project also worked with 20 traditional collective grassland communities to promote sustainable agroforestry systems using native species to combat bushfires. And also these were complemented by the introduction of more efficient and renewable energy technologies like eco-stoves and biodigesters, which reduced the demand for wood, but also crucially, reduced women's domestic workload. So there's always these ways that we try to bring in, women's work on women's economic empowerment in multiple dimensions. But of particular interest from the GESI perspective, I'd like to focus today on this innovative approach that the project used called agroecological logbooks, in which women recorded production, consumption, sale, and informal exchange of produce and inputs. And on the surface, these couldn't be any simpler. So each of its pages has 4 columns in which women record the various products they've sold, given away, exchanged, or consumed, and they calculate the value. And at the end of the week, they can see and approve the value of their contribution to the household budget. So it's not that they're doing things that they weren't doing before, it's just that they're giving value to what they've already been doing for years. So displaying the information this way, it takes away the invisibility from job that would have otherwise been called help or housework or women's work, and to show the monetary as well as the non-monetary contribution of women to their families. So knowing what they do has value. Knowing what they do has value, gives these women greater autonomy and decision-making power in several ways. So the use of the logbook strengthens the bonds between them, creating a group identity, and they would use this tool to hold regular meetings to share experiences and successes and challenges. And they also share their personal lives and finding emotional and sometimes even financial support within the group. So the group dynamic itself is also really important. But the logbooks had other positive effects as well. So once their contributions were finally made tangible, many women began to experience positive changes in their relationships with their husbands and relatives. And after a while, many of the women also brought up the need to include their families in these ongoing discussions on feminism and agroecology. And the project staff were, of course, happy to facilitate these discussions. And then from then on, the women began to experience a better and fairer division of labor, both in the field and at home. So this work was an eye-opener, not just for the project teams, but for everybody involved, really, to promote gender awareness throughout, giving visibility to women's inputs. Project staff noticed that it was also useful for disseminating other innovations, like the use of medicinal plants in the household. And perhaps most importantly, it leads to women having a greater say in decision-making within cooperatives and producers associations belong to, that in turn strengthens the economy of their communities. So to quote from one of the beneficiaries from a landless peasant settlement, She said, we women didn't know before that we had an income close to half of the minimum wage, and today we can already see it. We women can do a lot. We can be as we are, which I think is really quite powerful. And it just, it's in terms of the case study, pulling together some of the things that at IFAD we know are important in programming, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to talk about today, is making sure that it's being incorporated, women's participation and the participation of Indigenous groups. It's programmed actively in several different ways. So not just the technical bit around agroecology, but making sure that there's these activities working at the household and community level as well. So I'll end it there.
Thanks so much, Emily. Those agroecological logbooks sound fascinating. It's something to bring up in the MEL discussion, I think, later. And next we have Sarah McIvor. Sarah is a climate change specialist with more than 10 years of experience in climate adaptation, climate justice, and sustainable development. She has worked with community-based organizations, civil society, governments, and UN agencies, from local to national to international levels. In her current role as a senior researcher at IIED, Sarah works with the least developed countries group and marginalized communities to ensure their voices and priorities are included in international, national, and local climate action and decision-making. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Sarah McIvor, and I will be presenting a case study on Pamoja voices. Pamoja means together in Swahili. So this toolkit is about bringing all voices together to build climate resilience. Next slide, please. So we worked with local communities in Zanzibar and Tanzania, and these communities all operated local cooperatives, which were dependent on the natural resource base. So we had some communities that were producing honey from beekeeping. We had other communities that were growing some fruit trees, some native lemons and limes. And we had a community that were growing seaweed in the ocean. And basically all of them were threatened by climate change. And they were looking for solutions like how could they continue their livelihoods despite a change in climate? And how could they do this in a way that was inclusive, where every voice, where every priority within their cooperative could be heard, given that climate change, as we've noted already today, will affect people differently, with women and youth being particularly more vulnerable. So we worked together with the community to design and test approaches, with the community guiding us on each and every stage. Next slide, please. So in terms of the toolkit itself, what was developed and how it works, we created safe spaces through focus group discussions where we divided the cooperative into groups of older men, younger women, and we undertook a gender analysis and a climate risk assessment with each of these groups, basically to understand the current challenges that they were facing, their specific challenges, as well as understanding the solutions that they brought forward to deal with these challenges and their key priorities. So we were able to straight away kind of differentiate these different challenges, priorities across these different groups, across men, women, and youth. And we did see that different challenges and priorities did emerge. So for example, women who were often engaged in the planting of crops and harvesting were particularly affected from the weather by strong winds when crops were blown away and they had to replant. So they were bringing forward solutions like planting trees in order to protect crops. We had men who were often going to the market to sell the product and to buy the product, and they were finding the chemical fertilizers were very expensive. So they were bringing forward solutions like using local organic fertilizers that were more sustainable and more cost effective. And we heard from the youth that they were keen to have the knowledge and the skills from their elders. So they were inviting basically the elders to come and share their expertise with them so they could also benefit and incorporate it into their own business operations, into the cooperative. So that approach basically allowed us to have that differentiation, to hear from the voices maybe that we don't often hear from, to give them that space to bring out their priorities and their needs. And then we brought the whole group together again to listen to these challenges, to have an awareness of the specific challenges facing different members, and together brainstorm solutions and ways to tackle these challenges, and agree a collective action plan with collectively agreed solutions in order to overcome the climate risks and build further inclusion within the cooperatives. Next slide, please. So this slide just kind of shares some of the challenges and the solutions brought forward, and just to share some reflections. Building inclusion and climate resilience requires a range and diversity of solutions. So some are nature-based solutions, like planting trees to protect crops, protecting and conserving the forests. But we also have solutions like communicating meeting times in advance, so women could plan to attend around their existing commitments. Young women needed protective gear and suits that fitted them, that weren't only for men, but were able to fit them as well. So having tailored protective gear. And all of these solutions are vital. All of these will build inclusion and climate resilience. So it's important to have that mix and that diversity, and to welcome it all. And important that we as researchers, as practitioners, keep an open mind, willing to take that holistic approach to understand these challenges facing a community, and be willing to listen first to their solutions, and then complement and further build upon them. And the second kind of reflection is about the importance of involving all in understanding the challenges and coming up with the solutions, especially men as well. So we found men were really valuable in thinking through some of the challenges and bringing forward solutions to help women and youth, including sharing the access that they had to resources like land, finance, knowledge. And so we had this kind of collective working together, brainstorming to overcome solutions that would benefit the cooperative as a whole, and to members as well. So we, to adopt that inclusive approach and involving everyone is really key and important as well. I think that is everything. I will hand back now to the facilitator. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And a good reminder that gender isn't just about women, and also a good example of an intersectional approach, thinking through the youth component of the programming. And finally, we have an in-person presenter for a case study. So Dr. Yannick Beaudoin, hopefully I'm now pronouncing that properly, is Director for Climate Change and Nature Positive Solutions with Alinea International. He brings a climate change, biodiversity, and a new economics for transition lens to the organization. Yannick applies a science of change and participatory social processes in a variety of themes. He has worked with governments, local communities, industry, academia, and other actors in over 80 countries to design innovation processes and approaches that increase human well-being while preserving and enhancing nature. Welcome to the stage.
All right, so maybe to keep with the mode of the morning, pretend that I'm behind a screen. Okay, so yes, hello. It's always interesting to hear our own bios reflected back, but maybe one piece to note, I am an economist, I'm a geologist, and I also have an academic background in systems thinking for transformational change, which basically means I argue with myself a lot. So I'm here basically to show a little bit the highlights, we're in the startup phase of the Lake Chad Basin Conservation Project, which is a partnership for climate projects, so funded by Global Affairs Canada. We just started a few months ago. You're going to see some beautiful images that have nothing to do with the presentation, except that there are wonderful new acquisition of 50 centimeter high resolution multispectral, for all the research scientists out there, imagery, and if you can spot the hippopotamus, you get a prize. So this is, if I'm a little boring, you can look at the slides and be impressed. And this is all from the region, a brand new part of our biophysical analysis. But just to get you a bit of background on the project, it is basically looking at different action points when it comes to conservation, one of them being, and probably the most prominent one being, women and youth in particular, their leadership and their stewardship. So we're joined by a core partner, which is the Lake Chad Basin Commission in the region, and also a consortium of partners doing different, offering different expertise. So we have the CERFO, which is out of Quebec City, which is a big forestry management center doing all this beautiful satellite work. We have United Nations Association of Canada, which is predominantly leading on the youth work. And we have the Center for Indigenous and Environmental Research out of Winnipeg, which is facilitating through Indigenous practices and knowledge the application of the roles of women's leadership and stewardship. So in a way, this project just focusing on a bit of the GESI, which is all this jargon and all these acronyms, the women leadership component, we're really looking at it from an angle of not building capacity, but releasing the capacity that's already there. Women have had traditional, long-standing historical roles, not just in that region, but of stewarding and leading and making decisions. Now, of course, when they encounter a let's call it a Eurocentric governance structure, that becomes challenged. So in other words, you think it's all disappeared, you think you need to build capacity, but in reality, you're trying to build space and allow the existing capacity to be released. We're also looking again at how to teach those colonial governance systems, right? The whole region is governed in certain structures and ways that are, again, imported, imposed structures. And so you're actually trying to teach those structures to value the role and the leadership of women. You're trying to teach those structures to change, as opposed to thinking it's all about the community that needs to change. It's all about the women that need to have a stronger voice. They have their voices. The systems are not necessarily able to comprehend that. And then, of course, doing it through an action-oriented way. So through the act of restoring, through the act of rehabilitating a land, an ecosystem together in a community-designed way. Again, not a Canadian going over to say, well, this is how you do NbS, right? You're really there to listen, and you're there to help stitch together the approaches that can be taken. Through those actions, this is where, again, you're able to show that system the value, the leadership, the roles, the stewardship that women and youth can have in that system. So we're still in that very early stage of starting this project. I'm heading back there in a few weeks to start our biophysical work and do our baselines and do all the beautiful geeky geology stuff. And eventually I'll get to do the system stuff and the economics and challenge the geology as well. But some of the key challenges I wanted to highlight as well, and I'm going to only emphasize the structural challenges because I feel, in my opinion, that a lot of us share these key challenges, right? We try to do these things at a very local context, and we're trying to do gender responsive, ideally gender transformative approaches, applying NbS, and we're encountering things we don't always either see, feel, or like to talk about. So some of those are, of course, again, colonial histories. Yep, perfect. That was a nice little. So colonial histories, but not only the histories, the ongoing economic colonization of the so-called global south. I mean, it's just a reality. We're still in that phase. These countries are in the state they are because a lot of these structural pressures that come from the outside. A project like ours can't control that. We may be able to shed some light on some of those structural pieces. There's also, of course, the dominant development paradigm. It's still extraction and it's still exportation. If you're very successful locally sometimes, right, at doing maybe really regenerative agriculture, positive outputs on food security, small scale, smallhold farming, bring back the wetlands, and suddenly a mining company shows up from the north or from the east. It's all gone. And it's not the fault of the government, right? It's not the fault of the national government. This is a global set of drivers and pressures that projects, again, you're trying to apply NbS, nature-based solutions, in basically a system that doesn't even know what nature is, doesn't recognize it, doesn't particularly care about it. And so there's an incompatibility, square peg, what's that expression in English? Square peg, circle, round, something, yeah. And maybe the last one I'll talk about is there still is a limitation to adaptation strategies. We haven't figured out, we haven't stopped the cause of the need for adaptation yet, globally speaking. I was telling Kerry this morning, if in the 1980s somebody had said, well, in one day, am I going to be able to stand outside and not have sunscreen on? I could have easily said yes, because we've stopped the CFCs, Montreal Protocol. But we haven't yet stopped the cause. So it's very difficult to say, well, we're going to do an adaptation strategy in a wetland that'll last. We don't know. So we overestimate, we underestimate, but we do our best. So I think to me, that's some of the challenges we're trying to be aware of and integrate into this project as we move forward in a very, very complex area where, of course, the environment may not be the priority on someone's mind when survival is still a priority. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks, Yannick. A good reminder to keep systems thinking in all of our minds, especially because GESI itself is a structural challenge. So excellent, thank you so much for that. And I think with that, we're moving to a break. So we have a networking break for about 15 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll have an armchair discussion panel with time for Q&A for all the presenters. So we'll see you soon. All right, so I think we're going to get started, everybody, with the armchair discussion panel portion and Q&A, where you can lob all your burning questions at our presenters. So I'm going to introduce Yannick to come back up and moderate our discussion panel. So it's a bit of an armchair discussion. You'll be in an armchair, but they'll be online. So take some armchairs for those online. Thank you.
Hello. Excellent. So you have a Yannick with a mobile mic. Usually that means karaoke, but thank you for joining me. Okay. Yeah, so it was great to see the presentation this morning, and of course, some of them, like especially from our colleagues in Mozambique. I had the pleasure of working a lot in Cabo Delgado, so that was just good memories coming back there as well on mangroves. So basically, I'm going to ask a few kind of leading questions for all of our case studies, and then hopefully that'll also stimulate maybe some questions from the audience. So I'm assuming that everybody hears me online. Yes? Okay, excellent. So bom dia, Hirondina and Mondlane, and Sergio Queiroz. So just some initial question for you. In designing your initiatives, what tools did you use to determine which nature-based solution initiatives, as well as the gender equity, the social inclusion, the GESI, love those acronyms. What tools did you use to pursue in those 4 coastal communities? So that was Metuga, Cabo Delgado province, where the LEAP project is located. So what did you feel most comfortable applying there?
Boa tarde, pois. Yes, so yeah, definitely. I think maybe first I should mention that normally we conduct like mapping on degradation on mangrove. We have conducted the mapping here in Cabo Delgado, in the coastal area for Metuge, but also in Nampula provinces. So based on that, we were seeing an increasing rate of mangrove degradation. But we normally combine, we try to exchange synergies between projects. Civil society project, a civil society project brought to our attention also the situation of the Mozambican island, which is very critical. If nothing is done, that island might, disappear in the near future. And that was raised under a civil society promoted forum at the Mozambican island. So jointly with that team, we conducted additional consultations, and that's how we came to decide. We actually decided to target women, because we know that women, they are the most affected by climate change. They rely mostly in natural resources for livelihoods, but they also have a role to educate the community. They are in a key position to educate children and youth, but also elders. So that's how we purposely targeted women to play a role in that. But of course, as I mentioned before, we needed an entry point. So the entry point were the local community structures. like village development organizations, but also the community fishery councils, because those who are people, those are organizations that are locally based, and they know how to influence, the men to allow women to participate in the project. So that was our entry point. They helped us to mobilize women and test the intervention. So I will stop there, and if you have any further question, then I can.
No, obrigado for that. Obrigada. No, obrigado. Obrigado. So maybe building on that, because I'm also going to be a little disruptive about the questions that were prepared. So on the result side, so from what you did, your interventions, what did you find most surprising or interesting? And I'll also just qualify it by something, it can be things that worked well, but also maybe something that you think didn't work well. We can learn a lot from things that don't work. So maybe something you feel really kind of surprised you, struck you, and worked quite well, and then maybe a result that was not so good.
Thank you. I will allow Sergio, the project manager, to answer to that. He's more comfortable to speak in Portuguese, and then I will translate. I'll make a summary to translate. Sergio, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be speaking in Português. A questão é a seguinte, do que é mais surpreendente. No princípio, as comunidades da ilha de Moçambique, ou da parte costeira, eles pensavam que o mangal se multiplica por si só naturalmente, não é? E foi um desafio na altura em que estamos a implementar o projeto, no ano 1. Mas com a mobilização que nós tivemos com a comunidade, e a conscientização também que tivemos com a comunidade, e falamos da importância do mangal para a comunidade, então eles foram percebendo que, afinal de contas, o mangal não se multiplica só, porque viram isso com os seus avós. Então fomos fazendo demonstrações e sessões de participação conjunta. E é surpreendentemente que agora as senhoras, ou a comunidade, vai plantar sozinha, fazem planos de plantar sozinhas, e estamos a ter resultados positivos. Eles plantam e protegem a área que está sendo plantada daquele novo plantio e também daquela área que já está no mangal, porque o mangal é grande, que protegem para evitar cortes, por um lado. Por outro lado, nós também estamos a fazer a parte da poupança e crédito rotativo. Isso por causa de quê? As mulheres da ilha de Moçambique, ou da parte costeira, não tinham muito trabalho, ficavam sempre em casa. Os homens aqui iam para a pesca, iam para a atividade de salina, e elas ficavam em casa, talvez, só fazendo muitas das vezes a parte cultural. Mas agora, com aquele pouco dinheiro que elas poupam, já conseguem fazer empréstimos, não é? E conseguem fazer esses empréstimos e fazer pequenos negócios, fazer pão, fazer bolo, e algumas já conseguem vender roupa, aquela roupa usada, elas já conseguem vender. Então, é algo que não faziam antes, mas depois nós trouxemos essa abordagem que não é só ficar em casa, mas podem fazer outra coisa com um pouco de que elas podem poupar, fazer um empréstimo entre todos, ou entre todos. E talvez para finalizar, não roubar muito tempo, também se faz a horticultura, não é? E é uma coisa que a ilha de Moçambique as pessoas não faziam, mas com a intervenção da Fundação Aga Khan, da AKFC, dissemos, ok, enquanto esperamos a produção de mel, porque no mesmo mangal em que estamos a fazer a proteção, também estamos a praticar apicultura, e a apicultura não é sempre que se colhe, então estamos a fazer horticultura. Elas vão produzir, nas manhãs vão à horta, e depois nas tardes fazem pequenos negócios. Então são coisas que estão a acontecer com a nossa intervenção e que não aconteciam antes. Então é mais ou menos isso que eu quero partilhar. Obrigado.
So, in short, Sergio was sharing the most surprising change that he witnessed. The first one is that when he started the implementation, the mindset of the people at the Mozambican island is that they could continue cutting the mangrove, and the mangrove would restore itself naturally. You know, so that the project actually build awareness on that, that if the soil is being degraded, there's no way the mangrove will be restoring itself. So we have a role, we have a human responsibility to plant new trees and restore that ecosystem. The second, and he mentioned that the work that they were doing together with the women to demonstrate how to prepare the seedlings up to the step of replanting new trees. And he was also highlighting the fact that women now are the one planning the restoration areas. You know, at the beginning it was the project, you know, helping them to map the areas to be restored, but now they are the one doing their weekly plans and implementing the activities. We just provide some technical assistance. You also highlighted the saving and loan association that women were able to start with the income they got from the mangrove beekeeping. It allows them now to not only to gain money from the beekeeping, but also to take loans from those associations and invest in other micro business, you know, diversifying their source of income. And before the project, as we mentioned during the presentation, women were not really allowed to go out and do business. They were only responsible for domestic affairs at home, but now we have shifted that perception. And in terms of new income generated generation activity introduced, he was highlighting horticulture, which was a practice that was not done at Mozambique and Ireland. We are now in the process also of introducing crab fattening, new areas where we think this can contribute, you know, to conservation and also to reducing pressure on natural resources. But I also mentioned during my presentation one aspect that is really amazing, because for us, seeing a traditional leader, a community leader, I know, asking women to be part of their income generation association and being under their leadership, it's a good sign, because the other people are watching. If they see the leader of that community being under leadership of a woman, that helps to shift mindsets, you know. So that for us also is another aspect to highlight. Thank you.
Obrigado, lots to unpack in there. Hopefully some of the audience will help us with that later. I'll move a bit on to Emily. So it was great to sort of see the different qualities and aspects of the projects you introduced, especially around the archaeological, can you imagine? Around the agroecological activities that the project, the pro-semi-arid project employed. Which one do you feel encouraged the participation of women or equity-deserving communities and groups the most? Like, what do you feel really kind of stood out?
So I could say, first of all, that I wasn't actually involved in this project directly. So I sit in HQ, in the regional office, but my team is in HQ, and I'm relatively new to IFAD. But I think what comes through really nicely in this case study is that for me, it's this aspect of the backyard gardens that was really important for women, partly because just for the diversity of food from a couple of angles, you know, it's this sort of integrating. There's the nutrition benefits that come from the sort of own consumption of this varied diet. There's then through the bringing in not just having the production side and not just having the gardens, but also marrying them with this approach to the agroecological logbooks that then has all of these spillover effects also on the inter-household dynamics as being really this key. And then that reverberates back to the nutrition and back to the agroecological benefits. And you really see, for me, it's one of these really nice aspects. So of the interconnectedness of the programming across all of these aspects. And also to achieve, so for us, one of the key frameworks we use, I'm sure a lot of people do, is this IRBET, so identify, reach, benefit, empower, transform, right? As you, I mean, you referred to it earlier in terms of being responsive versus transformative. But for me, this example is a nice one of doing things kind of along the chain to make sure that you can push all the way into that transform, right? So yes, you've got quotas around women's participation. So you're identifying them and you're finding ways to reach them and bring them into the project, but not just being satisfied with that alone, but really thinking about what are the aspects that you need to start transforming the social norms that will allow them to increase their decision-making ability, their ability to bargain within the household and beyond, you know, also within their farmers organizations and within the community. And then the other aspect that I think is nice of this is that it's also this kind of a cascading story around knowledge management and taking learning, the way that this actually started in the South in other programming and seemed to be really successful thanks to good documentation, really good pressure by feminist groups in the country to make sure there's better data on women's involvement in agriculture generally, kind of creating this policy space so that other states were also interested in replicating this, so that, for example, in our program then up in the north, putting this in for the first time. So I think there's a lot of layers around this program, and the backyard gardens were particularly good from the GESI perspective to get, you know, the whole package.
No,
I hope that
great.
answers it.
Yeah, that's great. So maybe even leaning into that a bit further now, like knowing what you know now based on the results of the work and that particular example, if you were going to design something going forward to even more increase the social benefits and the biodiversity benefits, for example, what would be, like if you had a magic wand, what would be some of the ingredients you would throw into that mix? Again, learning from where you're at now and the experience you have now.
Yeah, I think, you know, those basic ingredients are there. It's a little bit maybe more in how you do it. So I think one of the first lessons for us is really sequencing. So needing these household methodologies and needing to engage at the household level. But if you do that later on in the project, you might have already left behind some women whose households were not supportive of them engaging in the project in the first place, right? So really doing these kind of household level engagement early on. So then you can get as many women, you know, integrated. So it's part of that, actually using it to increase your reach. I guess it's a simple way to say it, not just your sort of other benefits. So I think it's thinking carefully about the sequencing of activities. And it's also, in a way, you articulated it quite nicely earlier about just creating space, right? And sort of creating space early in the project. Similar to Hirondina and Sergio, like the understanding, and also from Sarah's project, you know, that a lot of these communities have a lot of the answers themselves, and a lot of women themselves will have these answers. So if you create the space early on for them to articulate what are their constraints, what are their needs, what do they think the solutions are, and doing it in these participatory ways at the beginning, then that lets you make sure that the activities are programmed. So, but then it's a lot of the same ingredients that are likely to be effective. It's just, it's almost more how you go about it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Again, so much more to unpack. I wish we had a whole day. I'll move on a bit to Sarah and kind of conclude the opening questions there, and then open it up as well to conversation here. So prepare, audience online and audience here, for some of your questions. So Sarah, I don't think we can see you camera-wise, but I know you're there. I've been told. I got it.
Yeah, I am.
Fantastic. So which of the climate adaptation strategies that you developed with the cooperatives targeted by the project in Zanzibar would you categorize as nature-based solutions? And again, you can elaborate on your definition of that, right? We don't need to stay static to one definition of nature-based solutions, but what do you feel were some of those strategies that really fit the bill?
Thanks. So yeah, we had some strategies that were about kind of planting more trees and kind of bringing more trees into the community, bringing back some of those previous forests that were there, but that agriculture might have taken away. And so there was those strategies, and they were brought forward particularly by women and by young women. The reason being is because they were planting their crops and they felt, they were engaged in this activity, and unfortunately stronger winds was actually blowing away a lot of their crops. So they had to replant again. And so they were thinking about this, the bigger picture about how can we protect our gardens while also in a more sustainable approach as well to protect the environment. So they were bringing forward the ideas of trees and surrounding their gardens with trees again, like it was, before. We had other kind of strategies that were being brought forward by men that were about different types of fertilizer that was more organic fertilizer, local fertilizer that they could use that was already there within their village as a more cost-effective measure, more sustainable measure, rather than buying chemical fertilizers at the market. And then we also had strategies of everyone, wanted to conserve the forest, especially for the beekeeping cooperative, to preserve the forest. Also, they had the benefits of for their beekeeping activities. However, it was only when we talked to the young women that we heard from them that actually going to the forest wasn't safe for them. They didn't feel safe going to the forest alone to engage in their beekeeping activities. They felt threatened that they may be attacked. So when they brought that forward to the rest of the cooperative, it was actually when they brainstormed together. I think it was some of the men put forward an idea of let's go in groups, so we'll have a group of women, young women and men, and we'll harvest, we'll go to our beekeeping facilities together. So we're creating safety. So while we conserve the forest, we're also making sure it's safe and it's accessible for everyone to benefit from, and dealing with any of those risks that we may not have known about unless we had listened to the perspectives from the young women in this case.
Do you feel when you say like the certain practices were preferred and suggested, does that automatically mean there was resistance, let's say, from men, or more just kind of trying to figure it out together kind of approach, or was there some explicit resistance as well?
Not so much. I think it was more just a lack of knowing, a lack of awareness. I think, it's about kind of barriers that are faced by different people are not known maybe by others until, they're brought into the focus, they're communicated. So it was really bringing that into awareness, and that's where I guess that equity approach comes in of like, let's hear from different groups, different perspectives. What are the specific barriers, the challenges that are facing you? And let's hear about that. So another example was that men thought that, women weren't coming to the meetings, the cooperative meetings. And so men were saying, the women aren't interested. However, the women were saying, we're not getting the communication in time, the advance notice, because we have a lot of existing commitments in the household or with children that we need advance notice so we can attend the meeting, so we can make sure it's aligned with our existing commitments. So when that was brought into awareness, the men understood actually the amount of work the women were doing and the need that they needed to, communicate a meeting time, a week in advance potentially, rather than a few hours. So it's really less about resistance, I think more just bringing that into awareness of the different challenges that are facing different groups of people.
All right, thank you. So maybe turning it a bit to some of the toolkits. So you have the Pamoja Voices Climate Resilient Planning Toolkit. Just very curious to sort of see what do you feel were the gender responsive and inclusive ingredients that were brought into that? And then what do you feel the results were? And again, I want to qualify results with sometimes we got good stuff and sometimes we need to learn from what didn't work. So if you have an example of both, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the question. The Pamoja Voices Toolkit, so it basically, we started with the community and asked, like, what do you need? And they said, we want a simple step-by-step guide. We want it in Swahili, in our local language. And we want it to be really straightforward. So, really, I guess, challenging us as researchers, no jargon, no acronyms, just make it simple. And so that's what we started on. But I think for some of our own learning is that we came in initially and we used maybe a lot of like text. We were drawing tables and things like that. However, that wasn't accessible for those that couldn't read or write. So instead, we switched to visuals, and we used a lot of drawn pictures, a lot of visuals, and that was able to engage and become much more accessible for everyone. So I really recommend that testing approach within communities and getting their feedback and for them to tell us how to improve is really, really useful, and something that I would encourage everyone to do. In terms of the approaches, so there is a gender analysis which basically looks at, really unpacks the activities and who is controlling the resources, who is making the decisions, who is involved. So you really get a sense of like where the decision making is happening and who is making the decisions. Is it men, women, is it youth, or you know, who is really controlling those resources? And we also did a governance analysis, which basically looked at composition. So how many men, women, and youth are on your executive committee, are on your finance committee, are on your, you know, education committee. So cooperatives have these governance structures. So really just looking at the numbers and reflecting on that allowed the cooperatives to sort of see that a lot of the power decision making was in the hands of men, and how then they thought about going forward, what could be an alternative, more representative structure. So they looked at a balance. Some of the results were that one cooperative decided to have every position had a chair and vice chair of each gender, so that there was, you know, that was able to bring everyone into decision making. They wanted more diverse decision making structures that had men, women, and youth involved in the executive committees, the education committees, the finance committees. So they started to have that in place, you know, by having a general assembly and voting for a new structure that had greater diversification. So that brought in more decision making for all members of the cooperative as a whole. And yeah, on reflection, I think a lot of this is really giving the space for cooperatives to reflect on their existing structures, who's holding the power, and then to think more strategically going forward, what would they like to do? Like what would their structure like to be in future, where they can bring in all voices.
All right, thank you all for that kind of opening volley of questions brought to you by ChatGPT. So now, tuning it more to all of you and also online. I can't see online, so I'm assuming somebody else is helping with that, but I'll pass it on to the floor facilitators for the questions. You had a question? Yeah, just right there.
I have more of a comment than a question. Is that valid? Okay. I mean, this is about income and sort of livelihoods. On looking at the case study of Mozambique, it says 80% of coastal families rely on direct extraction of natural resources. Given that population grows, the pressure on natural resources is bound to rise. And here in a case, you have almost 80% of coastal families. And they've done a good job. I'm putting 450 hectares of restoration of mangrove is no small task. Fantastic, well done. The comment that I have is, they mentioned a little bit right now about diversification, and I think that's very important. And I was wondering whether, I don't know what natural resources these are. What are the possibilities of doing some value-added activities, particularly for women? Now, the comment that I have is this. One of the other projects mentioned the lack of skills and knowledge to fully take part in business activities. I can't recall which project it was. But I think this business activity training is very fundamental. Okay? And in addition to that, the World Bank has done studies in Ethiopia and Kenya, where they provided socio-psychology training for women to increase their confidence in the marketplace. And it has produced some very good results. I attended one such session, and they produced all the outcomes of that. It's an experiment, but it has worked. And that was in addition to business activities. So that was my comment, sir. Thank you.
And maybe I could pass it on to our team from Mozambique if you want to comment a bit on that or answer.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you for that question, because this is actually what we are really concerned about. We're talking about a long coastal line. Mozambique and Ala is just the tip. And we are really concerned, and we are really thinking how can we help all these communities along the coast to really stop, destroying the environment, because we cannot just tell them to stop if they need to feed their family. So we need to bring alternatives to them. And yes, we are thinking in some areas where agriculture, the coastal area is near to very productive areas. We are trying to combine like processing, bringing women engaging them in processing agricultural products, and more nutrition agricultural products to sell in their communities. We are also thinking how we can engage the private sector, so that they can have a better market, to sell their products and get more satisfaction in terms of their livelihoods. But yes, we are open for more ideas. This is really an area where we are thinking the more we can diversify, the better, because people will not just stop. They need an alternative, Yeah, thank you.
Obrigado. And when you mentioned, of course, the World Bank pieces, what I also find fascinating is there's almost more need for the World Bank to receive training into, well, I mean, part of it, some of my work was that in the blue economy side, where again, you're trying to teach those institutions to de-patriarchize, that's a bad word, like and dematerialize and change what a market is at a systemic level. So the psychological training might be better for the World Bank. Are there any, so more questions? Yep, perfect, excellent.
Hi. Yeah, okay, perfect. Victoria Shore from Africa Trade Desk. So I actually work on private sector stuff, and I wanted to hear more about livelihoods with actual specific things. So bees, okay, honey, perfect. Mangroves, I assume fishing, great, perfect. Agriculture, well, of what? Are we talking maize? Are we talking local plants that people use for like a rash on their skin or something like that? Like what sort of products are we talking about? And then the last one, which I guess would be more for the UN folks, is the land management and zoning laws for these markets, as well as informal traders, because most women are informal traders, and if you are not allowed to operate in many areas, including out of your own home, that kind of limits what you're allowed to do. So that comes into zoning laws. Thank you.
I wonder maybe that first one, Emily might want to take that.
Yeah, though I don't know I have anything, I don't have any concrete answers. It's true, these sort of, that once you start branching out beyond just the production, then you have to think about all of these other regulations. I think for IFAD, because we work, we provide loans and grants to governments, and so it's governments themselves who are implementing these things, and so that would not any zoning issues would already be something considered by the local governments who would be the implementing partners on these. So yeah, I think, but other than that, just agreeing that it's certainly an issue and it's something to need to be aware of.
Is there any other, Sarah or Hirondina, do you want to comment on some of that question as well?
Yeah, I can come in on sort of some of the products as well. So we were working with sort of local community producer cooperatives that were producing honey, lemon and limes and seaweed. And all of those were under threat from kind of sea surface temperature rises for seaweed, drought for lemon and limes, and then the range in different temperatures as well for bees for producing honey. But there was also kind of these cooperatives were selling to the market, but they had a vision of actually owning their full value chain. So not just production, but processing and marketing as well. And they developed business plans for that. So they developed these climate resilient business plans where they looked right through the full chain about storage facilities so that they could protect their products over the long term, how they could process it despite changing climatic conditions. So that was really, their aims, starting from, yes, looking at that initial production side, but then how could they own more of the value chain themselves, and how could they make sure it was climate resilient across the value chain as well. So that was kind of, where they're starting from, and they developed their plans to share with others as well on how they see that vision.
Thank you. And just out of curiosity, that production, was the pressure to export offshore, or was it more bioregional? Was it more local consumption? How was that?
It was more local, and selling to the local markets at this stage, but they had dreams of wanting to export, and getting to that point as well. I mean, it was very kind of starting from the beginning as a community, and then wanting to kind of further scale up. Particularly seaweed is quite a key crop that's used globally, so there's huge potential. But first of all, starting to get it right where you have production that can still grow despite changing and increasingly warmer sea surface temperatures. So first of all, it's really getting that resilience right and built in, and then taking it further then for looking at export opportunities.
Thank you. Are there online questions or?
We do have a few questions, Yannick. First one we have is for Emily. And the question is, could you please comment further on the impacts of expanding decision-making influence?
Yeah, thanks. And actually, just previous to pick up on that last two with respect to the products, I'll drop a link in the chat for the online thing. There's a really nice video showing just the incredible range of several hundred different kinds of products. That by using the agroecological logbooks, you could actually document just the range of, so not just the production side, but how many products and things were transformed into that women were producing. And it's really sort of impressive to see. And then, as with the case in Tanzania, then using business cases and approaches for women to be able to take all those forward. But in terms of the impacts on decision making, these are really nice, and they range from the intangible or harder to not easily quantifiable ones that just really that women articulate themselves about their own understanding of their own self-worth and how they understand how they contribute to their own families. And then this, again, it's sort of building up from there, and in then conversations within their families, and this thing that they then decided that they wanted some support in facilitating the conversations amongst their family members about a feminist approach to production, I thought was really brilliant, and just sort of starting to see how this builds and builds, and certainly also bringing in some of our wider experience on household methodologies and the importance of this. And when you really speak to people who have participated and families as a whole, right? Again, as someone said earlier, gender isn't just working with women, it's also understanding the whole relations within the household, and really for husbands to understand and to get a sense of the value of what their wives and daughters are adding, and then being able to say, oh, actually, yeah, maybe I need to put some of my labor effort to support what you're doing. So it's decision making, I think, on a couple of different angles across the household, and it's about how women see themselves. It's about the conversations within families, and then what that lets women do to be able to project not just decision making again on household things, but then how they engage in their farmers organizations. How do they engage with local project staff and being able to have voice in that sense also back against with the project. So I think this is a sort of topic we could go on forever, but just in short, I think some of the examples.
Excellent, thank you. Maybe one more from online right now before I go back to the floor.
Certainly, thanks. This was a question for Hirondina and Sergio. And the question is, do you have any examples of IGA conflicting with conservation aims? And if so, how are these conflicts resolved? Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, thank you again for that question. Yes, so before our intervention at the Mozambican island, the people resorted to the mangrove to cut the trees so that they could build their boats. They could also produce charcoal or even for fire or wood fire. And also they have the tendency to open salt pans, that was the other income generation activity that's completely unsustainable because it contaminates the soil, and then it's difficult to restore mangrove if the soil is less productive. So those are the kind of initial eagers that I can mention. So the alternative, as I mentioned, is not just to tell them no to build awareness. You need to give them alternative. You need to give them something else. So that's what we did. We introduced new income generation activities like the mangrove beekeeping. Now we are expanding to crab fattening. We are also introducing poultry and horticulture so that at least you have something else to say. You need to protect this environment, and then they know the importance. Most of them, they know the importance of it. They might lack information in terms to the extent of degradation, but they know the importance of keeping the environment healthy. But they don't have alternatives, so that's how we do. And we engage also in awareness raising campaigns. Once you have the evidence, because, for example, now in some areas, when you talk to the people, they tell you, oh no, now we have more fish. Now that we have these beehives and people are not cutting the mangrove, we have more fish, more resources. So those are the kind of evidence that we take to build awareness, so that people can shift their behaviors. Yeah, thank you.
Obrigado. From the floor. Yep. Those of you. All right, down there. Let's go down there.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed them very much. It's a comment and a question. To me, women's preparedness and, readiness to succeed, to participate and to succeed in a gender equal society has a profound psychological and educational component. So my question is, have you identified the psychological obstacles that women faced and had to overcome in order to successfully participate in your wonderful projects? Thank you.
Excellent question. Maybe we start with Hirondina and then I'll move to the others.
Well, I will allow Sergio to, he's more in contact with the women. Please, Sergio.
Okay, thank you so much. Não tem nenhum constrangimento que as mulheres tenham em realizar essas atividades. No princípio foi um pouco difícil, como disse, mas agora é uma atividade que elas fazem até cantando, não é? Como estamos a fazer uma atividade de apicultura, isto praticamente no princípio foi novo para elas, mas depois da equipe da AKFC treinar eles, nós temos até evidência, fotografias, enquanto as mulheres estão a fazer a colheita ou a monitoria das colmeias. Então, não existe nenhum constrangimento aí na comunidade. Elas fazem com livre e espontânea vontade. Obrigado.
Yes. So in summary, Sergio is saying there's no psychological constraints because the approach that was used is key. You need to first engage the local structure that they help you to engage women to participate. Of course, at the beginning they were a bit reticent because it was a new activity. They've never been in beekeeping activities, but with training, with technical assistance, now they do it even without the team, and they are singing. They have evidence of them, singing around the mangrove, and they're taking even the kids to support them as well. So yeah, we really don't see any psychological effects so far. Thank you.
Emily?
Yeah, I think it would just be a bit, as I was saying earlier, in terms of the positive effects that we see. So maybe it's not that way around psychological effects, but definitely that's one of these benefits that come of women's own sense of themselves afterwards. So some of the evidence comes sort of ex post afterwards. In other projects, we see when we use the GALS methodology, and one of the nice things about that is one of the first steps is normally this sort of self-assessment of what are the constraints that the women themselves are facing. And sometimes that there will be an identification of issues that are related to that, of their own, how they frame what's possible, and then how to overcome that. So sometimes I think it's about making sure you've got the right tools, no matter what sort of is, to give women the space again to sort of identify the problems as they see them. And then a final thing is just to another aspect of programming that's quite important for IFAD in a lot of our projects is adding in functional literacy training as well. And that's partly around the functional side and what the importance of that. But I think one of the really important aspects of that is also the psychological effect. It's the confidence boost. It's what does that do to your ability to engage with others in a confident way? And I think that's where a lot of the spillovers from that happen. It's not just being able to read and write, which is important of itself, but it's also these other impacts. So it's a really good question. And definitely one worth studying more, I think, some of these impacts of how they, what they are, and then therefore how you can kind of program for them, early on.
Thank you. And Sarah, do you want to chime in on that too?
Yeah, great question. And completely agree that, within a society, within a system that is kind of been telling women and youth that, they don't have a voice and they're not at the table, and then that has huge effects on confidence. And so we looked at that in this kind of case study, in this project, and we set up women and youth networks where women could basically connect with other women that were in positions of decision making. So some women were the financial controllers of the whole cooperative. We had chairs that were women, so they were then connecting with then other women that were wanting to know, to hear their story, to hear their experience, and so to kind of share some of that with them, because it's not only about in terms of governance, in terms of numbers and ensuring women are at the table, but it's also giving them the support and bringing back the confidence that unfortunately an unequal society has taken from them. So setting up those networks, and they were very simple. It was via WhatsApp that were, communities that women and youth could just connect one-to-one with each other, a kind of peer-to-peer learning support, and they could do that in their own time and when suited them, just to hear, and share each other's experiences and skills. So that was one way, basically, to kind of overcome some of that psychological impacts of inequality.
All right, thank you so much, all of you. I'm looking at our host organizers. Is there time for one more question, or are we almost at? No, all right, we're good. I'm assuming that some can be collected, perhaps, or sent or submitted, and maybe there's a way to have some of those answers offline and off the conference. But thank you. I think it's been a really good conversation. We always want more time, and we always want to dig into things. So a little bit after, I believe after the break, or soon, we'll have a World Cafe, and we'll be able to get into some of those more open discussions. So this will continue. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to be introducing Jennifer Elms to come up and introduce our next activity, which will be the World Cafe. So hopefully some of these questions can be applied in the discussion groups. And then, as you mentioned, we can collect them and have a reflection period on them as well. So I'll turn it over to Jen.
Thank you, Calais, and thanks everybody. Thanks to our speakers and of course our audience who had such great questions. It's so interesting to hear these firsthand experiences. So I'm just very happy to have these insights from our teams and our partners here. I have the pleasure of introducing our activity, which is a World Cafe. I'm hoping some of you might have already experienced a World Cafe before, but if you haven't, you're in for a treat. Essentially what we're going to do, I'm going to lay out the logistics, and if anybody has questions, then please raise your hand. Essentially, we're going to divide into 4 groups. One group who will remain in this room is for folks who prefer to communicate in French or are French speaking, so you can stay here. Then we have 3 areas outside in the main atrium for 3 other groups. There are 3 themes that will be discussed. I'll introduce those in a minute. And so each group will discuss one theme with a facilitator and a note taker who has been assigned to your group. For our French-speaking folks, you will remain in this room to discuss all 3 themes together. And then outside, every 15 minutes, we will be asking the group to physically rotate to the next group where that facilitator will lead that discussion on that particular theme. Clear as mud? Clear as crystal. We're good? Okay, great. So the 3 themes, the first one, who will be facilitated by yours truly, and with my note taker, Veronica Lo, is focused on GESI and natural resources governance. The second theme, which will be facilitated by Calais, who you've just met, and Emily Cholette, will be focused on GESI and MEL in NbS projects, so monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And group 3 will be facilitated by Angie Days and note taker Sophia Marzei, who is here. She's also an AKF rep, waving her hand in the corner. And that's going to be focused on improving access uptake by feminist and women human rights organizations to nature-based solutions resources. So we will ask that you divide yourself up into groups, and because you will all have the opportunity to discuss all of the questions, never fear. You can just pick one group and start there, and then you'll be rotating around to all of the other ones. So you won't miss out on anything, I guarantee. Just a few comments, more like principles, maybe a little community agreement for us all, just to get us on the same page and in this kind of comfort of sharing, is that the World Cafe is really meant to cultivate an environment where practitioners can really feel comfortable sharing. And we want to really encourage everyone to feel safe. We're not going to be taking notes to share externally, but they will be kind of distributed around to the group if you would like to have access to that. And again, just encouraging everyone to share your successes, share your experiences, but we also know that there are many challenges that we face in this space. And there's lots of great learning within that. So please feel very free to share those as well. We won't be sharing any of the names of organizations or specific initiatives discussed. We also want to encourage you all to keep the discussion focused on GESI in NbS. So of course, everybody comes from different backgrounds, different experiences and implementation. So we want to learn from your experience and expertise. So if some of the conversation does go more generally, that's okay. But we also want to really challenge ourselves to think about how are we applying this both in GESI and in nature-based solutions. We want to encourage everyone to share as many practical examples and experiences as possible. Again, there's so much learning and richness in the doing of things. So while the theory is fantastic, if you can share examples, we highly encourage you to do that. And finally, the World Cafe discussion notes, again, non-identifying, will be shared in a post-event report back. And we will also, I believe in the past, we've done an online blog to share with you. So that will be distributed afterwards. So I'm going to ask everybody to divide into 4 groups, and my colleague here, Uju, will also now provide some directions for our online participants, as it's a little bit different, but we don't want them to miss out on the fun. So they're also going to be joining in on that. Uju.
Thanks, Jennifer. So just to explain how the World Cafe is going to operate online. So initially we had asked individuals who were interested in participating in the breakout group discussions to indicate either with an EN or an FR on your name. If you did so, we've gone ahead to assign you, and we've assigned the facilitators to the various groups. Similar to what's happening in room, the French group is not going to rotate. So every 15 minutes, you just be rotating on your topic of conversation. But for the speaker and the facilitator within that room, everyone is going to stay the same. So once I'm done explaining, we're going to open the breakout rooms. So a couple people have already been assigned to different groups, while the rest of our participants who are interested, we just ask you to click on the option at the very bottom of your screen, and you can see where it says breakout rooms, and then you can choose a room to go into. If we end up seeing that some rooms are overcrowded, we might end up moving people to another room. But like Jennifer said, throughout the entire session, you will get the opportunity to go through every single theme. So don't feel like you have to be in a particular room for a particular theme. And then similarly, online, we've asked our facilitators to help with note-taking, but to also identify someone within your group who might be able to support with note-taking in your room. And we just also want to know that we'll be sharing reminders every 15 minutes as well. And then for the facilitators, if you're not able to, we'll also be able to move you. And then also for those who are in the room, just know that it's only the group members who are moving. The facilitator, the note taker, isn't moving. So we're going to be going from group 1 to 2 to 3, 2 to 3 to 1, 3 to 1 to 2. So just in that order, just go to the next group that is assigned. So I think those instructions should be clear enough. If you need any clarification, we'll be on Zoom to help respond to any questions, and then also in person. So I encourage you all now, you can stand up and rise to the atrium, and then those who want to participate in the French discussion only can stay here in the plenary.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I think, are we all ready to go with our online participants as well? Just give it 1 minute to make sure that we're all back and present. I hope everybody enjoyed that experience. I was facilitating, and I mean, as much as we wish we had more time, it was a very productive conversation. So thanks to everyone for being so engaged. We ask that each group nominates someone to report back. So that will be from the facilitators and the note takers. So for each group, whoever feels more comfortable reporting back, you can go for it. I can share a little bit from group 1, and then I'll hand over to Kerry's group. So be prepared, you're coming up next. And of course, this one was very much focused on what approaches could be most effective in overcoming barriers to engage equity-deserving groups in meaningful participation, specifically focused on nature-based solutions, of course, but a lot of the conversation was more general. So on that question, we focused on a lot of the roles, the traditional roles and responsibilities, and the distribution of power within the household, within relationships, but also within local governance structures, and recognizing that even if there are policies in place at the national level, for example, these don't necessarily be distributed across communities or even at the regional level. And so we also had, and this was across all three groups, in fact, that we discussed. And then, of course, we also had some conversation about some of the informal roles. And one of the key points that was raised here across a couple of the groups was around the unique and critical role of Indigenous people and Indigenous women in the contribution to how resources are understood. So even from satellite imagery, which I think some folks are now working on, how that is then interpreted by local communities and women specifically, and how that relates to how the system is distributed. So it was very interesting. I could go on and on and on. But the second question, which of course relates directly back to this, is what tools and methodologies have been used or that folks are aware of for assessing how women and other equity deserving groups access and use natural resources. And of course, there were two that really boiled to the top. The first was around mapping. So mapping all sorts of things, mapping these roles and responsibilities, mapping what services exist, mapping how economically groups and institutions are structured and distributing resources, and then the roles that gender plays within that and other intersecting identities. And then the second is we talked a lot about gender analysis and assessment within projects, programs, within, even just the design part of the project cycle, where we can ask key questions either through questionnaires, surveys, consultations, but using an overall framework to understand these key critical components like laws and policies, the roles and power dynamics that exist within communities and contexts, services and institutions that are available, and of course, most importantly, is how access and barriers, access can be restricted by barriers. And so we all kind of discussed a little bit about the GBA Plus model, of course, which is available through Global Affairs Canada and provides this kind of overview of how to structure the assessment. So I think we can have each group present, and then at the end I'll ask if anybody wants to add any. So were there any, and I'm asking both the online group, if there's any additions to this particular theme. I'm sure there's lots, but if there's any that anybody really wants to flag. Okay, then we'll go to group 2, who will be reporting from group 2. So group 2 was in fact Calais' group and Emily. Oh, sure, yes, actually, yeah. Okay, we'll put you at the, perfect, fantastic. Okay, Calais, thank you. And I'll ask each reporter to come up.
Yeah. All right, so I'll give a synopsis. So we were the monitoring, evaluation, and learning group. So our questions primarily looked at how do you integrate GESI considerations within frameworks, thinking about indicators and assessment tools, thinking about the challenges, and maybe some examples of some practical tips and tools. So we talked a little bit about how mindset really around the need for a gender-based analysis is important to drive transformation and really integrate it into the MEL process. So it can't just be donor-driven. It needs to be something that's valued by the team. The struggle to find transformative indicators for a 2-year project and like how you can measure that in an achievable way in a short time span. Thinking about how proxy indicators can be used to assess some of these more transformational changes, thinking about using more qualitative approaches like stories of change, how you can potentially quantify qualitative measurements using things like scorecards. We talked about a couple examples of scorecards that could be used. trying to see if there's anything I missed here. Oh, and the emphasis on participatory tools. So using participatory mapping and approaches within community, both to design a project early on, and then also how you can use tools like that kind of throughout the project life cycle. And emphasizing the importance of storytelling and really working in community and how that can both get at looking at the biodiversity co-benefits of your project and how the community sees itself and how it's changing over time, and also some of the GESI gains that you may be able to achieve. So that's it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Calais. And now we'll go to the online participants to see if anybody wanted to add on to the group 2 discussion.
Well, I guess that was me. Yeah, I was covering some of the mail things. So yeah, a lot of similar things came out from our side. I think one of the summary points came at the end of just the fact that mail is often an art as much as a science. And a lot of our conversations in each of the groups was about getting this right balance between being comprehensive and having enough disaggregation and having a range of indicators across all these different domains that we're wanting to include, but at the same time realizing that project teams might get overwhelmed and making sure that you had you know, a level of measurement that was feasible in the projects as well. So getting that kind of balance, but then also, as Kelly mentioned, the sort of quantitative, qualitative balance and making sure there's enough qualitative pieces coming through. One nice example that came through in terms of also breaking out of silos and getting some of these co-benefits across these different domains and outcomes that we're trying to see, because that's I think a fairly consistent issue of you have experts with their own level of expertise and you get to, a lot of silo thinking. So having a learning, research, innovation hub, bringing together experts so explicitly learn from each other and talk to each other and measure things that matter to each of them is another thing. But then otherwise just making sure you've got enough investments in your projects, enough budget, time and space to be able to disaggregate and measure the things that are important, and then also from a learning and knowledge management perspective, so that the more qualitative things that are coming up from the communities and from your project staff at local level have a chance to come up to the surface and really be documented in a way that is actually used and ideally used in an adaptive kind of a way for the project as it's going along. I hope that's a reasonable summary of the depth from the groups.
That was a fantastic summary. Thank you so much. And as Yannick was saying earlier, a lot to unpack there. I think that will be the direct quote I take away from today. So thank you for that. And now we'll turn to group 3, which I think Angie will be presenting on the theme around improving access, uptake by feminist and women human rights organizations to NbS resources.
Thanks so much. So we had some really great conversations across the 3 groups, and I've just pulled out sort of 3 themes that I wanted to highlight. So the first, unsurprisingly, was language. We've talked about there's a lot of jargon in this space. We don't have a common understanding of what NbS actually are and how they differ from what we've been doing before. Let alone translating these terms to local languages and contexts. And I think that related to the groups, the feminist and rights focused groups, that may make it difficult for them to see how NbS and related issues connect to what is important to them. So we need to work on that. We also talked about the fact that, in overcoming that, things like practical examples and storytelling, as Calais also referenced, are really important to make it concrete and enable them to connect it to their experience and their priorities. The second, I want to thank Yannick for sort of setting us up to talk about the tough stuff. So we did have a lot of conversations about sort of the fact that, we exist in this colonial capitalist sort of extractive approach or system, and that influences how funding opportunities are structured. And that doesn't lend itself to equal partnerships, to meaningful engagement, to the time it takes to really build trust and sort of allow our partners to lead us and to have processes of co-learning and unlearning. And I think that was a big theme that came out across the discussions. And lastly, I think that another big piece was around the sort of bandwidth and resources that feminist and rights-focused organizations have. It's often very limited. They're kind of moving from project to project. They don't have a lot of core funding that enables them to do strategic planning and visioning, to learn about new issues and opportunities and how they might connect to the priorities that they're already working on. So, you know, there is this need for more flexible, long-term funding that really enables more strategic collaboration. And I think that implies more funding, but also more trust around how we engage with partners that may not be the partners that we've traditionally worked with in spaces like nature-based solutions and climate change adaptation. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Such excellent points that are being raised here. I'd like to go to the online participants to see if there's anything to add there for group 3.
Yeah, so that was me. Actually, we discussed practically the same kind of thematic. So the question of language, of course, came very quickly. It's the challenge of literacy, of the way we translate documents. There was also a question of, you know, the challenge of using and making more visible local expertise and resources. That's definitely something that needs to be improved. We also spoke about colonialism and how from the global north or western side, we like to develop our own language and concepts, and we then impose it to our organizations in the global south. So how can we, you know, better integrate indigenous knowledge perspective into the tools, the resources that we work with, and to be aware that sometimes in most communities where we work, the question of NbS is not a separate entity, or doesn't make sense to be viewed separately. It's already embedded in the practices of the communities. So again, it's something else we need to acknowledge in how we work. And maybe last element that was brought up that was really interesting is maybe we don't focus enough on scaling up on our good practices, on the projects that we put in place. We like to very often focus on developing new projects instead of building on good practices, good pilots, which then helps in building more tools and resources at the end.
Thank you so much, and it's interesting to see so many common themes coming out as well across all of the discussion groups and themes. So thank you for that. I did want to go back to the online for group 1 to see if there was anything to add as well, because I've been informed that at the beginning I think we might have missed a hand being raised. So I want to make sure that there's still space for that voice.
Thank you so much. This is Jennifer. I was the facilitator for group 1 and had a bit of a Zoom failure there. We had a really great discussion, and it's interesting to come back to the theme of GESI and natural resource management and overcoming barriers for equity-seeking groups, because a lot of the same themes have come out even in very different questions and topics. So just to quickly highlight some of the discussion points, we had some folks raised the idea of building on structures and groups that already exist in communities, and working to make them more inclusive wherever possible, not reinventing the wheel if it's not necessary. Also seeking out, where necessary, women-only spaces, because it's very important for reasons that we all know, for building confidence, for sharing in a space that that is safe, but then also looking for opportunities for mixed groups, whether it's mixed sex, mixed age, whatever. The tools, there were several really interesting tools that people identified. Storytelling came up, mapping, whether it's visual mapping to be inclusive of people of different literacy levels. And we also talked about daily clocks, which are not specific to natural resource management, but do give really interesting insight into how much time it can take for some people to access different resources and to use them during the day. So lots of different techniques. And the point that I think we came to, which was really interesting, was that often assessments and knowledge gathering can be itself a very extractive activity, and it can be quite transactional. So having techniques like theater and storytelling, where the group also enjoys and learns from each other, those can be very powerful, not only for the person who's gathering information or doing the assessment. Thank you, and thanks for coming back to me.
Oh, thank you. Such beautiful summary there. So thank you. Very powerful additions. And now we go to our final group, last but certainly not least. I'll invite Kerry up to represent the French language group. And this group actually discussed all three questions. So Kerry will give a summary of all of them. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Ça va pas vous étonner qu'on a adopté.
Thank you. So you won't be surprised that we've had a more systematic approach to our discussion, and the three questions were really interactive. And so we had a lot of similarities, but we started with the key point, which is that to ensure that we have a very important approach that integrates everyone with their respective abilities and etc., we have to incorporate in our efforts a transformative approach with the power relations. We need to ensure that we are taking in account the realities that are present with the violences against women, the different dynamics towards them and the other groups, and that implies engaging with the local decision-making organizations, governments, local governments, because if they are not included, we cannot ensure that even though these groups might be included or represented, we won't be able to advance these agendas. So to make sure that we are oriented in the right way, especially regarding equality, when we go over the fact that feminist groups are able to access to the solutions based on nature, how can we access to these groups to ensure that we are helping them to? It's like a triangulation of the knowledge that we have. And that brings us to there are some cuts on the line for the interpreter. So when we talked about engaging, sharing and engaging the results-wise, about the importance to be integrated. So there were cuts on the line. So we have a CMR that doesn't include every necessary result. So when we were talking about the involvement of the feminist associations, we've had many similar thoughts to what has been discussed earlier. But one of the things that in my opinion was really important, and I think it reflects the consensus in the room, a lot of groups of women that don't use the word feminism have a lot of common points that affect their realities. And if we are not accommodating these approaches, we are not supporting them in the solutions based on nature. So it implies that we are here to fund and to support if the groups are asking for it, and to give them the freedom to go forward. Which brings us to the last point, which is the point you mentioned lastly, the timelines, system limitations. The requirements of the funders are not aligned with these needs. So it implies a systematic adaptation of this international system and all the means we have to make sure that we have the time and the possibility to establish trust, and from there have solutions coming from that point. Thank you.
Well, thank you, merci. There's so many takeaways that we also want to make sure that we're sharing all of the rich information that has been shared here today. So just to let you all know that there will be notes from these discussions that will be shared, and we will try to do that as soon as we possibly can. So just to say thank you to all our facilitators, our note takers, and to, of course, to all of you who have made the World Cafe, I think, a great success. I'll now invite Angie Daze, who is the Director of Gender Equality and Social Inclusion for Resilience at the International Institute of Sustainable Development, to give us some remarks and close this session. Thank you, Angie.
Thanks so much. I really want to thank everyone both here and online. This was such a rich conversation, and I really feel like we got at some of the very deep issues that we need to be thinking about in this space of integrating GESI in nature-based solutions. And I think, you know, for me, a few main takeaways. One is that when we talk about GESI, we tend to think immediately about women or youth or particular groups. But what we're really talking about and what we've dug into today is that we're looking at unequal systems and structures that are grounded in historic and persistent discrimination, denial of rights, and undervaluing of particular types of knowledge and contributions. And so we really need to sort of take that into account as we're approaching these initiatives around nature-based solutions. And I think that what that implies is we need a deeper and more nuanced understanding of the context. And this is speaking to big systemic issues like colonization and governance structures that exclude certain groups. We talked about psychology. You know, there are all these contextual big picture issues that we need to have a better understanding of, but also practicalities like the example of safety equipment that actually fits women. That's also something really important to understand about context. And I think it's very clear from these conversations that these processes of social change that need to occur for NbS to effectively integrate GESI, they have to be driven by local actors. And I think it's important for us, and I think we've started this process today, to reflect on what's the appropriate role for Canadian organizations in sort of enabling those actors to drive these changes. And Yannick, I liked your mention of creating spaces. I think that's really an important part of this, and so much of it is about process. I think it's very clear that there's a role for women's rights and other rights-based groups in these NbS initiatives, but we need to work to connect it to what's important to them, to invest in their organizational capacities that enable them to engage with these processes, and to do that with principles of trust and equal partnerships, and working towards this bigger systemic change that Kerry so eloquently spoke of. The other thing that I thought was quite interesting that I wanted to flag, because it didn't really come out in the group discussions, is the importance of networks and mentoring for representatives of equity-deserving groups as they're taking on decision-making and leadership roles. I think that's a really key thing as well to sort of build in. It doesn't all have to come from us. It can come from peers. It can come, these are important issues to consider in how we engage. I'll stop there, but I think I just really want to thank our speakers and our facilitators, and as I said, everyone here and online for such a great discussion. I want to thank the organizing teams at IISD, AKFC, and Global Affairs Canada for all the work that went into bringing this event together, as well as our technical team and the catering teams for such a flawless execution of the event and the tasty snacks and the lunch that we're going to enjoy momentarily. We're really grateful again to our hosts at Aga Khan Foundation Canada for having us in this beautiful space. We love coming here. And also for all the work that went into making it possible for people to participate virtually. So we really appreciate that, and for recording and sharing the event today. We do have a small request. The planning team would really appreciate if you could fill out a survey to provide some feedback on the event. There's two ways to do that. One is by connecting via that QR code that you'll see on the screen, but we also do have printed surveys. So if anyone would prefer to fill out a paper survey, please put up your hand and our team will hand it out. See a couple of hands, and I'm just going to pause for like 3 minutes to give people time to fill in the surveys. Great, I think most people have finished, so thanks a lot for completing the surveys. The feedback's really appreciated. Just to close off from me, as was mentioned by Calais, if you want to learn more about this topic of GESI and NbS programming for adaptation, we will be putting out a technical brief in the coming weeks, and there will also be a set of case studies coming out in early 2024, so watch this space for those. We will have lunch for those joining us in person. I think we're a tiny bit behind schedule, so we won't have quite the full hour for lunch, but we'll head out there after. To those of you who have joined us online, thanks so much for your patience and for staying engaged. We really appreciate you being here and providing your perspectives. And at 2 o'clock, we're going to return for a community of practice session, which will be convened by GAC and IISD. And we're going to hear more from the organizations that have been selected to implement NbS for adaptation projects through the Partnering for Climate Fund. And if you didn't sign up for the community of practice on the online registration, but you would like to stay, please feel free, you're very welcome. So if everyone can come back at 2 o'clock, enjoy some lunch, and I think I'm handing to Uju for a few final pieces. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Angie. Just quick information from AKFC. First of all, thank you everyone for being a part of today's session. And we'd just like to flag from AKFC's end that we do have a couple of other events coming up this month and then in early November that we'd like to note to you. So next week on Monday specifically, we'll be having another edition of our Global Reads Book Club session. So the QR code on the screen as well is also an opportunity for you to sign in. But if you go to our website or on our social media, you'll find the link as well. And then right after this book club session, we'll be having another event in partnership with IDRC and the School of International Affairs at Carleton University, specifically on a report that the Lancet Commission has launched, speaking about promoting peaceful communities through health equity and gender equality. So that's November 2nd. So those two events we just like to put on your radar if it wasn't already. If you'd like more information, you can speak to me after, or you can go on our website, our social media, you will find the details to join this event. So thank you very much and enjoy your lunch. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So So we'll be getting started with the afternoon session. Thank you to everyone who has stayed engaged with us, both our participants here in the room and those who are also joining us online. So to get started with the next segment of today's agenda, I would like to welcome back to the stage Kerry Max to give us a bit of overview about what we're about to get into in this afternoon session. So please let's welcome Kerry.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining us. As this is sort of a restart of the event, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered today is the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and we are grateful for their stewardship, knowledge, and wisdom, all of which contribute to the essential exchange of knowledge that we are trying to promote through this community of practice. So I'm gonna try to set the stage for the presentations by Partnering for Climate partners by giving you sort of a quick background on the multi-year nature of the exchanges we're trying to do through this community of practice, talking a little bit about Global Affairs Canada's programming context, and then some reflections on the key takeaways that we have to date on mainstreaming gender equality, social inclusion through Partnering for Climate into the nature-based solutions space. Et pour certains d'entre vous, vous avez déjà entendu ça, mais pour ceux qui n'ont pas entendu et ceux qui veulent peut-être une discussion plus grande, plus élaborée des origines et du contexte, Veronica, je pense qu'on a l'enregistrement de l'ancien événement. The last event is on the NCAI website. Alors, on va en discuter du NCAI dans un instant, mais l'enregistrement est là. Vous pouvez vous promener dans une forêt et écouter toute la sagesse de vos collègues là-dessus. Mais pour vous rappeler, ce matin, on a créé Partenariat pour le climat à partir d'un processus de consultation. Et c'était clair pendant le processus que on voulait non seulement l'argent, surtout on voulait l'argent, mais non seulement l'argent, mais aussi un forum pour échanger de connaissances, de leçons apprises à un niveau assez régulier pour assurer que sur un objectif tellement important, qu'on ne perd pas le temps à réinventer la rue.
very important that we don't lose our time to reinvent the wheel.
Sagesse et des leçons apprises partagées dans la salle et avec ceux qui nous rejoignent.
Profit from the wisdom and the lessons that were
au-delà
learned.
des webinaires, des événements comme ça, pour partager la connaissance,
So after these webinars,
on a
where we share the
une
knowledge,
réunion annuelle
we
pendant
have
la Semaine
an
internationale du
annual
développement,
meeting
qui cette
during
année
the,
sera le 4
International
au 10
Week of
février.
Development. But this
Si
year is going
on
to
a
be held
un hiver
from,
normal, si en Ottawa,
February,
est un temps idéal
4
pour
to 10.
patiner sur le canal du
And
Rideau.
if we have a normal
Et on va
winter
vous
here,
inviter.
this is going to be a great moment to ice skate.
Si on a un hiver normal.
If we have a normal winter.
On va vous inviter à nous rejoindre à Ottawa pour cette réunion. Et là, on a l'intention d'inviter tous nos partenaires, les 16 partenaires du Partenariat pour le climat, à se présenter, à faire ce qu'on fait aujourd'hui, un petit parti. Ainsi, on va avoir le UCN, l'Union internationale de la conservation pour la nature, qui va présenter leurs leçons apprises jusqu'à date de leur projet d'accompagnement du portfolio de programmation climat positif pour la nature du Canada et pour partager leurs idées ou leurs apprentissages sur l'application du standard global. Pour le contexte du financement climatique, comme j'ai mentionné ce matin, on a commencé avec 5,3 milliards de dollars, duquel 40% et pour l'adaptation, 20% devrait être positif pour la nature, c'est-à-dire doit générer des bénéfices naturels pour l'adaptation au changement climatique ainsi que la biodiversité.
the nature itself.
Et 80% de l'argent
biodiversity.
doit intégrer l'égalité de genre. Et finalement, comme j'ai mentionné, partenariat pour le climat, on a 300 millions pour l'Afrique subsaharienne et on a 15 millions pour un projet qui est en train d'être, qui est toujours dans le processus d'être co-créé avec les communautés, les peuples autochtones du Canada et le gouvernement du Canada. So I'm going to finish just with this 3 of the things that we did to try to integrate gender equality and social inclusion in nature-based solutions through Partnering for Climate. The first that you've already heard from is the fantastic work of IISD and the partnership that we greatly value, where they have a website, they have an online course, a really professionally done online course in ecosystem-based approaches, which in the world of language are nature-based solutions. And they are supporting the COP, and Veronica, you'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. We also, as I mentioned, have the IUCN project, NABSA, which is a nature-based solutions monitoring and accompaniment project, where the IUCN will be accompanying a subset of all Canada's nature-positive programming to look at the application of the global standards for nature-based solutions, best practices, but also, and this came up yesterday during the steering committee, to learn about how those global standards may not reflect the best approach when they're dealing with things like Indigenous issues and true engagement and true anchoring of Indigenous knowledge systems, since those standards and the whole concept of nature-based solutions are still instrumental, and they're still using a conceptualization of nature that is different from one that is held by many communities, including Indigenous communities. And finally, as those of you who went through the application process lived directly, we worked very, very hard with our specialists to allow for integrated coding in our results-based management approach. In other words, you could do nature-based solutions and gender equality. And that was a small systemic transformation that we succeeded in doing, notwithstanding that the broader system is still somewhat difficult to move ahead with. So with that, Veronica, can I turn to you?
So thank you, Kerry. I will just say a few words with some additional context for this Community of Practice event, and also some updates from a Community of Practice steering committee meeting that we held yesterday, with the purpose of the steering committee to help advise on the activities of this Community of Practice, but also to represent the needs of its diverse members and all of you here today. So just to recap, I think I have a slide here. Yeah, that's it. The Community of Practice is a forum for organizations across the world to exchange knowledge, expertise, and networks on planning and implementation of nature-based solutions for adaptation, with a focus on biodiversity, co-benefits, gender equality, and social inclusion. And I think we've heard and have seen it reinforced in today's sessions how important it is to have such a space to exchange with each other, learn from each other. Each one of us has important stories to share. Just by networking, I've heard just a fraction of powerful stories that individuals are doing, and also collectively to fight for change. And it's really inspiring for me personally to hear some of these stories and exchange with some of you. So I hope we can do that on a sort of broader basis. And I also just wanted to reinforce, of course, that this is, of course, a community of practice for anyone working in the space of nature-based solutions for adaptation, and not just under the Partnering for Climate initiative, but broadly across the world and also within Canada. So just under the umbrella of the Nature for Climate Adaptation initiative that Kerry has described to you, IISD is providing support to the community of practice in a number of different ways. We're helping to convene events such as this one today, where we can come and gather and share knowledge and experiences, learn from each other. We also have this dedicated webpage. I have it listed there on that slide, as Kerry mentioned, where members can actually access different resources, events, which we hope will be populated soon with different input from members and from yourselves. And Also, IISD is a member of the steering committee that I mentioned earlier. We support the steering committee in its activities, and we had a meeting yesterday, which I'll just provide a few brief highlights about. So the Community of Practice Steering Committee has been formed by individuals who have expressed interest and have been engaged in informative discussions about nature-based solutions for adaptation over the past year and a half, and whether it was reaching out to us at our past hybrid events that Kerry mentioned, or responding to invitations that have been put forth by networks such as FSPG or C4D. So currently the SC members represent a diversity of Indigenous organizations in Canada, civil society organizations, think tanks, the private sector, and there are plans to ensure that the steering committee membership is diverse and representative in terms of gender, sector, age, expertise, etc. We had our first official meeting, as I mentioned, and we will be making the proceedings of each meeting accessible to everybody in English and French and put on our website so that it's transparent and you can see what our ideas for the work plan are. Just some brief highlights from yesterday. We met to discuss governance and membership of the steering committee and our work plan. And really, what really came out of this meeting was reinforcing the need to have a space to exchange with each other and to take the time that is needed to unpack how we each interpret and value nature, how we interpret nature-based solutions, and to ensure that the community of practice is encompassing of these diverse worldviews and different values for nature. We heard a quote from yesterday's meeting was that progress happens at the speed of trust. And so that's an important takeaway for us as a steering committee as well, that, you know, as much as it is about exchanging ideas and knowledge, it's ensuring that it's reciprocal, that there are benefits to local communities, that people are benefiting from the knowledge that we're sharing, and that we create a trusting environment to share ideas, which we'll be doing in an activity later on today. So we actually thought maybe to start off our activities, we need to come up with a sort of visioning statement or some kind of exercise where encompassing all these diverse worldviews. So we're hoping to develop that in the next couple of months. And in February, we'll have a chance to present that vision and refine it based on your feedback at the International Development Week convened by Global Affairs, where there'll be a focus on Indigenous knowledge, as Kerry had mentioned earlier. So we'll also be meeting on an ongoing basis, 3 to 4 times a year, and we'll ensure that, you know, what we discuss will be fed back to you, and also that there is a mechanism for our members to reach out and provide their feedback. So that was just some brief highlights from our meeting yesterday. I hope that was informative for you, and you can also feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. I'm just closing with a call to action, which is, you know, recognizing that maybe some of you are in this space for the first time and you don't know about it. You're welcome to visit our website. Here's our QR code to join the community of practice. You just send an email there or access it through the link in the slide. And we'll also, in the spirit of trying to collaborate and be responsive to feedback, have a quick survey at the end of this session, which we hope you can help us to answer so that we can understand your needs and desires for different learning topics, formats for knowledge exchanges, and so on. So that wraps up my presentation, and I will hand back to you, Kerry, for the next part of the session.
Can I get up without knocking it down again? Okay. Could I just ask you to put back that last slide on the community of practice? And I just want to reinforce the importance here. First of all, we realize that that's a really long name. We were going to change it to X, but as you know, that's sort of been taken. So it will be rebranded at some point very soon. But in preparing for this afternoon session, it became clear that even amongst some of the partners that we'll be presenting, they weren't members of the community of practice. And what I'd like to do is just encourage everyone, please, to take advantage of your networks within your organizations across the people you know who may be interested. Please let them know and please have them sign up. They're not going to get inundated with stuff, but the point is we do use that mailing list as a way of informing people of tools, events that might be of interest, and of inviting them to things like the International Development Week. Promise that you won't regret it, but it is our way of reaching out. And with that in mind, we've got an opportunity to have, for the very first time, a presentation of some of the Partnering for Climate projects that have been approved and announced. I mention announced because we had hoped to have had all 16 projects announced by this date, but there's been a slight delay. The last project will hopefully be announced on the 4th of November, at which point you'll get to know everybody. We've already heard from Alinea and their Partnering for Climate project. We are also going to hear, and I'll invite El Hadji and José, if you could join us on the stage. We'll hear from SUCO and Mission Inclusion. And then online, we'll be hearing from Plan International, Soko Devi, and Fondation Paul Jarin Lajoie. I hope that I got that right. No, Paul Léger, PGL. And I'm going to invite each of you to introduce yourselves, because as you can see, you can do a much better job than I have. But what I'm going to suggest is maybe we alternate. So we'll start with you, El Hadji, if you want to come up and present. Presenters are going to take 5 minutes to present on their projects. We're going to run through. If we do have time for question and answers afterwards, we'll come back to do that. But we're also then going to have some breakout sessions to follow up on some of the issues that have been raised.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tous. Donc, mon nom c'est El Hadj Faye. Je suis le chargé de projet ACFAO au niveau de la SUCO. Un projet qui est porté par SUCO en collaboration avec Interpares. Donc, c'est un consortium d'organisations qui porte ce projet et qui travaille donc en Afrique de l'Ouest. Comme le nom indique, le projet s'appelle Action climatique féministe en Afrique de l'Ouest. Elle est portée donc par les deux organisations en collaboration avec des organisations partenaires. Prochaine slide. Donc, que vous voyez ici, au nom de 8 partenaires, donc les partenaires de Interpares que vous verrez à gauche ou à droite, les partenaires de SUCO de l'autre côté. Les 8 partenaires sont des organisations paysannes, il y a aussi des associations de jeunes par exemple, il y a des ONG, mais surtout, il y a une entreprise, c'est vraiment innovant comme partenariat, parce que je pense que les enjeux climatiques nécessitent l'implication de tous. Donc, on travaille également avec une entreprise qui fait des actions dans le développement des énergies propres en Afrique, qui s'appelle Sentac. Donc,
it's a collaboration that is really for the activities. The objective of the project is to reinforce women's and young people's ability to adapt to CC in coastal and climate change in coastal and island region of Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, and Togo. So the intervention zone is in West Africa, so Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, for those who know Senegal, the islands for Guinea-Bissau, and the islands at the south of Ivory Coast. So, and the islands that are really rich for the humid zones and biodiversity. For Togo, the south and coastal zones of Togo also are concerned, and Guinea-Bissau too. And the fourth country is, I talked about the 4 countries already. So the zones that are, the populations that will beneficiate from this are about 49,000 people. So 81% of women, 18% of men, and 41.7% of young people. So that's a pretty good proportion because we're almost half of the proportion. And all these communities are living in these zones, and they are living mainly from agriculture and fishing. So we're not going to stay on that part, but you know the climate context. So coastal erosion, land salinization, drought, flooding, and ecosystem degradation, notably the mangroves. Regarding the actions that are planned, we have actions for the region. So climate resilient agroecological practices to allow the restoration of degraded lands and ecosystems, but also the restorations of the mangroves, so mangrove reforestations and the natural homes of some elements of biodiversity, and also GHG emission reduction by using solar and eco-energy equipment. And all that is based on strengthening the local government systems and the inclusion of women and young people in the committees, for example, the management and the reinforcement of the capacities to create plans answering to these preoccupations. Regarding the approach, the GESI approach, we are working a lot on the gender and intersectional analysis, but above that, we are trying to implement all the parameters we talked about today. So gender, sex, gender, sexes, ethnicities. We're valuing a lot the knowledge of the populations also, and their practice too. We are trying to have some specific care and support for women too, like support for the creation of feminist movements or advocacy systems, capacity buildings on climate resilient techniques, or strengthening for economic empowerment and energy diversification. So this is all the collaboration we are planning on with the local authorities. And I think that's the end for me. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Elhaj.
Thank you, Elhaj.
Ashley Dawson,
Ashley
International,
Dawson.
are you online?
I am. Can you hear me?
Excellent. We certainly can. Over to you.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashley Dawson, and I'm a Senior Program Manager at Plan International Canada. On behalf of Plan International and our partner, the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada.
Hold on, Ashley.
Whoop.
So Uju, you're saying come back so we can get things straightened out. We've got some technical difficulties here, so we're gonna do a take two after the next presenter, if that's okay with you.
Sounds good. Okay,
sorry about that. Alors, si je peux, je vais inviter José Lamy.
So if I can, I will now invite José Lamir from Mission and Inclusion. Thank you. Thank you, and good morning to you all. I'm a director for the project here, Mission and Inclusion. I'm really happy to be with you. I'm gonna go into English now because it's a project mainly built and conceived in English. We can start now the presentation if it's available.
All right. So the RESI project, which is a regenerative seascape for nature, planet, and people, is a project led by Mission Inclusion in collaboration with IUCN. Next, please. All right. So unlike a lot of project for P4C, we signed March 2023, and we're scheduled to finish activities by December 2025. for a total of 30 million. We're implementing the project in 5 countries. In Kenya, where we target northern Kenya Kilifi seascape. In Tanzania, where we're in Tangapamba. In Mozambique, in Mbane, in Madagascar, and Siranana, and in Comoros, in Moeli. So all 5 seascapes mean that we're targeting coastal and marine communities and ecosystems. And this project is meant to be supported and including many partners. So we have in each country both conservation organization and women organization who are part of the planning and implementation of the project. And we also have 7 technical partners who will bring their expertise and leverage other components of initiative that they have implemented in other projects. Next, please. So we have 3 pillars in this project. The first that is called here climate, but that we usually refer to as Blue Planet, revolves around supporting the management structures of those seascapes. So both marine protected areas, which are usually larger in terms of superficie that they cover, and locally managed marine areas, which are usually smaller and more community-based. The second pillar is Blue Nature. This is where we will implement nature-based solutions. Oh, 3 minutes, thank you. And the last pillar, Blue People, where we will support women and youth to get them involved in blue economy. So economy activities that are sustainable, both in terms of revenue and in terms of how they manage the resources that they require. Next, please. I'll skip this one. And this one. Just make sure I wrap up in due time. So regarding what we'll do in terms of blue economy, and just to mention, so Blue Planet for the management and Blue Nature for the NbS, those are 2 pillars supported by IUCN. And at Mission Inclusion, we're more dedicated to blue economy. So this will bring together building entrepreneurs' capacities, promoting their access to blue economy opportunities, making sure that they have access to the resources to implement them, and also supporting women in their organization in advocacy activities where they can elevate their voices to ensure that their rights are being supported within those activities. Next, please. So I wanted to have a bit more time to make sure I present the GESI component, our strategy. So it has 4 pillars of action. The first, in terms of recognition, aims at recognizing how climate change specifically affects women and marginalized people, and understanding those specificities. The second pillar, inclusive participation, to make sure that they are involved in all the reflection and decision-making around the different initiatives to ensure their adaptation to climate change. The third is to ensure that they have equitable benefits from these initiatives. And the last one, influence and leadership, to get them involved in advocacy to promote and have their rights protected throughout those different components. Next, please. So just as a conclusion, I wanted to explain that the RISI project is part of the Blue Wall initiative, which is really African-driven and was at first initiated in the Western Indian Ocean. And it aims at accelerating and upscaling ocean conservation, enhancing social ecological resilience, and also the development of a regenerative blue economy. So thank you, everybody. That was Reese.
Okay, can I invite Ashley from Plan? Okay, Ashley, take two.
We can try this again. Good afternoon, everyone. Like I said, my name is Ashley Dawson, and I'm a Senior Program Manager at Plan International Canada. On behalf of Plan and our partner, the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada, I'm happy to present our Partnering for Climate project, COSME for short. Next slide, please. The COSME project takes an ecosystems-based approach. It is implemented along the coastal regions of Kenya and Tanzania. In Kenya, Plan International will implement across 65 terrestrial and coastal communities in Kilifi and Kwale counties. And in Tanzania, the Jane Goodall Institute will implement in 45 communities in the Tanga and Pwani regions. We've partnered with the Jane Goodall Institute, who in Tanzania will implement forestry conservation activities and its Roots and Shoots program. And the project will leverage JGI's experience and technical knowledge in community-centered conservation. We'll also partner with a number of technical stakeholders over the life of the project, and we're proud to engage with the Canadian-based Cascadia Seaweed Corporation, who will utilize their technical expertise and experience from working with Indigenous communities in British Columbia in the seaweed sector to add novel Canadian innovation to the Kenya context, to improve yields and introduce value-added products that are regenerative, sustainable, and profitable. Next slide, please. The project aims to directly reach over 49,000 participants, including over 26,000 women and girls across Kenya and Tanzania. In Kenya, the project will mobilize women, namely through a savings group approach, in which all participants will also be members of one of 3 NbS groups. And in Tanzania, women will namely be mobilized through forest conservation groups. In addition, primary school students will be mobilized through agricultural clubs in Kenya and the Roots and Shoots clubs in Tanzania. They'll also be reached through a social behavior change communication strategy and through the provision of clean water solutions in targeted schools in Kenya. Next slide, please. The project aims to achieve its ultimate outcome through 3 intermediate outcomes, which seek to scale up resilient livelihoods for women in the blue economy and improve communities and coastal management. COSME is a scale up and expansion of a previous coastal livelihoods project implemented in Kwale County in Kenya by Plan International, which also engaged women namely through the restoration of mangrove forests and diversifying livelihoods and seaweed cultivation. This iteration of COSME project expands beyond those sectors and includes forest regeneration and conservation, as well as building the social and financial assets of women and their households, engaging community members and actors to increase awareness and to advocate for climate change action, as well as increasing communities' resilience to plan and to mitigate against the effects of climate shocks. Next slide, please. COSME will employ 3 interlinked nature-based solutions for climate adaptation and biodiversity conservation in 3 selected ecoregions. To highlight a few points here, under the mangrove and restoration and conservation, mangrove groups will be trained on management and conservation, provided with inputs, and receive support to formalize their groups through local government entities for legal recognition and legitimacy to play more formal roles in conservation. Under regenerative and sustainable seaweed production, activities here will focus on enhancing the knowledge, skills, and assets of new and existing women-led groups in seaweed production, value addition, and commercialization, and the piloting of innovative solutions to increase productivity. Under the community-led forest conservation, groups will be trained on locally relevant, sustainable forest regeneration and conservation, enrichment planting, and wildfire management. Support will include inputs such as seedlings and nursery supplies. Community-led forest monitoring and patrols will also be facilitated. Next slide, please. In terms of climate adaptation and biodiversity co-benefits, again, just to name a few points here, through NbS, a number of biodiversity benefits will be achieved. For example, as mangroves act as natural buffers against coastal erosion and storm surges, this will further protect the communities from the impacts of sea level rise. Sustainable seaweed farming can provide alternative income sources, reducing reliance on unsustainable fishing practices, and contribute to economic resilience and a sustainable seaweed industry. Community-led forest management will help preserve biodiversity, enhance ecosystem services, and mitigate climate change impacts. In terms of climate adaptation, a few points of note. Women will have access to time-saving and resilience-building assets, such as solar water purification kits and fuel-efficient cook stoves that support soil and water conservation, regeneration, and biodiversity. Women will also receive regenerative agricultural training and supplies to diversify their farming methods and crops to increase yields, enhance household food security, and adapt to a changing climate. Next slide. And to inform the initial design of the gender and inclusion strategy, the project leveraged a number of gender assessments and conducted consultations to understand the gender and inclusion barriers and the dynamics within the region. Currently, a deeper gender-based analysis study is underway in the implementation areas, and this will help us localize the information to inform technical approaches as well as implementation strategies. The project will employ a gender transformative rights-based approach to address 3 key interconnected gender barriers: inequitable gender norms and unpaid care work that prevent women's full participation in economic life, engaging men and boys in positive masculinities, and increasing women's knowledge and awareness about nature-based solutions. These barriers will be addressed at the individual, relational, and community level to ensure sustainable, meaningful change throughout the life of the project and beyond. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Maintenant, j'invite Frédéric Thomas de Socodevi. Frédéric, êtes-vous là?
And now I'm gonna invite Frédéric Thomas from Socodevi. Can we hear you? No, we can't. Yes, we can hear you now. Good morning. So I'm Frédéric Thomas, and I'm the director for Socodevi in Senegal. And I'm going to present to you the project Naturel, which is the project that is financed by Socodevi. So as you can see, the title is saying Naturel is really a project for the conservation of nature and the amelioration, the improvement of the life quality of women and their communities. So the project is located in Senegal in the regions of the Saloum and Casamance deltas. We have 4 marine protected areas and 5 indigenous and community heritage areas. This area is protected by UNESCO since 2011 and is really of a crucial importance. So these are 2 deltas that are composed of mangroves, and these are really important for Senegal. During the last years, we've had a lot of deforestation in these areas, and they're trying to be regenerated now. The protected marine areas are zones that are really elaborated by the government, installed by the government, when the community areas are more places where the community decided of the places they wanted to protect, just to make sure that they can ensure their the zones they are living in and they can get revenue from. So we're gonna work directly with one type of people, and it's young women. They are chairing the committees for the ACPAs, so the community heritage areas. So, and also the members of cooperatives. This project should affect 85,000 members on about over 123 villages. So here I can show you on the map the marine MPAs, marine protected areas. You can see them in blue. These have been appointed by the government. And then you have the community heritage areas in red. So here in Sinsalum, you can see the MPAs and the community heritage areas that are also represented. And so we're really gonna work on the earth and on the coastal side also, and inside too. So we have vulnerable communities in the protected sites. And so to help them, we're gonna work on 3 pillars. The first one is ecological restoration. So as you can see, most projects have been presented on the same pillars. So ecological restoration, ecosystem and biodiversity conservation, by working a lot with the community so that they can adopt the solutions based on nature. We're gonna really touch the strategies to help. We have restoration plans and ecological improvement also against the attacks. We're talking about greenering of natural environments to prevent the erosion and the advancement of salted water. We also want to work with IISD to improve the implementation of a project for these environmental services, so that the money we get from their funding can benefit to the communities affected. We are also going to work on the implementation of a program for the environmental education. About 140 schools are going to be affected, and also the communities. We're going to work on the durable fishing activities also for all the people who live from fishing and want to make it more reliable and sustainable. We also want to work on the governments to make sure that it's inclusive and equitable, so that the women who are often the more at risk because of climate change and the deforestation of the mangroves, because these are the one doing the cultures of oysters, for example, have the governments and the importance of this, and can participate with a lot of importance on the decision making for the management committees that are often populated by mostly men when we're talking about natural resources and their management. So the last one is economology. So it's the mix between economy and ecology, and it's about the development of economic activities, so the transformation and the processing of the natural products and the economical activities that they create. Many are already existing, but we're really gonna work to develop these activities, and also for like maybe let's say restaurants, or maybe like restaurants, to ensure that they have a better implementation and a better revenue for the communities. We have many local and international partners. So we have a network for the women inside the local fishing communities. So we have local people ensuring that we are implementing our interventions, and also of course the government, so the services of the state, etc. Thank you for your attention. Marie-Ève now, who's gonna join us from the foundation. From the foundation, can you hear me? Yes, perfect. We're gonna let you speak now. Yes, here she is. So she's gonna join us from the Fondation Paul Gérin-Lajoie. So I can share my screen if you would let me. Yes, just 1 minute. I want to just let you know that I am a counselor here and I've been collaborating with many people on that very beautiful project for the knowledge, rights and leadership, actions for the women to adapt themselves to the climate change. We can go to the next slide. So the project Women in Action has been done in collaboration with 2 Canadian organizations. We are working closely with 5 local partners located into 4 territories in the east of the Congo Republic. So we have local partners. We have the Coalition of Women Leaders for the Environment and Sustainable Development and the Diobas platform in Kivu. They are already working in the conservation, biodiversity, and the population, the indigenous population, and the Women's Association. We had the budget of $10 million, and this project is really short. It's going to be going over 30 months from 2023 to 2026. We can go to the next slide.
So the final goal is to adapt the women to the climate change. We are going to work on the resources that we need to group the people and the houses in order to improve the adaptation to the CC with the benefits of the biodiversity in forests. So the first result we had, it was the adoption of the SVN of adaptation, the restoration of the agricultural and forest areas, and they produced some benefits in terms of conservation and restorations of the biodiversity. We want to work with biodiversity and the restoration. There is a technical aspect too that is going to be sustained, that's going to be improved. It's going to be sustained with the local knowledge, because we know that there is a local area, the local sector that is working on that aspect. The second result we had, it was the improved control of the resources. And this is associated with the growing and their adaptation to the climate changes. Concretely speaking, we are going to have some training that is going to give them with technical assistance for the producers. We're going to give them credits to the young women and women in order to facilitate their access to the AJR and the nature. We're going to have a critical aspect that is going to be given to them in terms of alphabetization. We're going to give them access to training against the violence that is exercised against women, which is very important in this region. So we're going to give them tools in order for her to develop her. So we want their influence to be improved in their communities. We want to hear their voices in terms of adaptation regarding the problems we have with the climate. So we're going to give them access to governance, to climatic governance and leadership in order to make this a dialogue between all the stakeholders to adapt themselves to the climate change. They're going to be a group that is going to be formed in order to have a concerted optic to the adaptation of the climate change. Last slide. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci beaucoup. So I'm going to invite Veronica up to explain how we're going to roll with the next session.
All right, well, thanks for staying with us in a long afternoon. And thanks to our presenters for these very interesting presentations. And now we get to the interactive part where, we can talk to each other and learn from each other. That's the community of practice part of this. So we're going to organize this in 4 breakout groups. And in each of these groups, you'll be led by a colleague or one of our presenters. And the topics are on sharing experiences, promising practices, and lessons learned on planning, and this is quite broad, so it could include topics such as developing project implementation plans or monitoring and evaluation frameworks. The second topic is on sharing experiences on integrating adaptation throughout your project, and this could involve speaking about sharing experiences on developing climate risk assessments, for example. The third is, in keeping with our theme from this morning, developing a GESI strategy. And the fourth is on planning for biodiversity or ecosystem co-benefits, and that could include also community ownership of those co-benefits. So we'll have 4 breakout groups in person, and these will be repeated online. And I've just listed the facilitators for the in-person groups and for the online groups so that you can self-select. And whether you're online or in person, you can self-select which group. And the language is also noted, so you can select on topic and language preferences as well. Global affairs colleagues are also kindly circulating and can help in person with any interpretation needs if there's a particular topic that you really want, but it's not offered in the language that you want. So let's see what else I'm missing. All right, we might also just come around, because we're self-selecting, we might come around to equalize the numbers a bit. So don't be offended if we just gently suggest that you join another group if you're able to. You'll have 30 minutes for this exercise. And we'll give a little warning, and we will forgive a little bit. We know that people get very excited and want to, keep their discussions going. So we'll be kind and accommodating to a certain extent, just to make sure we have time for our coffee and networking session. You're right, and we're also going to be asking our facilitators to assign note takers. You can take notes yourselves, or you can assign a note taker. If you have a computer and are willing to do so, we're hoping to capture some of these notes so that we can create a brief summary of our discussions. And we will just make it very brief, very high-level overview, and we won't include any identifying information just for privacy concerns. So I think that's my final note to you all. We're also, sorry, one more thing. We're trying to, of course, create a very respectful and positive and constructive learning environment. So hope that we can have some nice constructive discussion. So with that, I would invite the groups that are interested in planning to follow José here on the stage. She's going to lead a breakout group in the room in this area, and you can just self-organize and organize the chairs as you see fit. And the second group is on integrating adaptation, and that's being led by Al Haji, who will be on this side of the plenary room. And then outside, we'll have Calais in the far right, leading the topic on GESI, and then on the other side, we'll have Francois on biodiversity, and maybe you just want to raise your hands, Francois, and I guess most of you know Calais from this morning. Okay. So let's take it away, and we'll have about 30 minutes. Thank you.
Alors tout le monde, on va recommencer. Et je vous promets que vous allez avoir du temps après pour jaser et partager vos cartes d'affaires. Okay, so we're running more than a little bit late, but given that we have until 4:30 for our schmoozing afterwards, maybe we'll eat into that, but we'll do our best to not. So if I could ask for someone from each of the 4 teams to come up, yes, that's what I'm doing, and share just some very succinct highlights, maybe sort of a minute's worth, that would be great. I guess we have 2, maybe I can start with the online. Do we know who online is reporting back? Okay, I can see someone's hand waving, but I can't see who you are from this distance.
I can go
Ashley?
first. Yeah.
Okay, Ashley, go ahead.
Perfect. So very briefly, we were the planning session. So just in terms of a PIP process and planning, one of the key takeaways was the importance and the challenges of the sequencing of activities and the feasibility of activities within the given timeframes. Has been a challenge, I think, so far for our groups, and making sure you've planned all of that out with all of the stakeholders. And then in terms of M&E, we just acknowledge the complexity of the issues that are being tackled and how to develop indicators that are accurately measuring that change. And then the challenge of ensuring that you have the breadth of expertise to measure that change as well. So those, I think, were our 2 key quick takeaways.
Thank you. Marie-Ève, je pense que vous étiez la deuxième, oui?
Oui, rapidement, peut-être pour soulever, nous, on travaillait sur le développement d'une stratégie d'égalité de genre et d'inclusion sociale. Relever un défi très important quand on parle de GI, on parle de changement, de transformation, de rapport de pouvoir. Puis on soulevait l'enjeu majeur que dans des projets en environnement qui sont sur 2 ans, 3 ans, c'était très, très, très limité comme période de temps pour avoir des résultats durables puis avoir des changements plus structurants. Fait que ça, c'était un élément important qu'on relevait. On disait que ça exigeait sans doute des projets avec des stratégies où il y a plus de plaidoyer, puis du plaidoyer à différents niveaux, autant au niveau des organisations avec lesquelles on travaille qu'au niveau communautaire, qu'au niveau plus politique, pour avoir des changements, encore une fois, qui peuvent avoir une portée même légale. On a soulevé aussi l'importance de s'allier avec des groupes locaux qui ont les expertises, qui ont les savoirs locaux, s'associer avec des organisations de femmes, des organisations autochtones, des groupes sociaux qui sont concernés par les territoires touchés. Puis d'aller en fait là où ces groupes sont. Puis on a aussi soulevé le fait que, encore une fois, même le terme même de changement climatique, c'était un concept qui n'était pas reconnu, puis que les gens ne se l'appropriaient pas de la même façon partout. Fait qu'il y a peut-être même un travail de base à savoir, avec les partenaires avec qui on travaille, quelle est notre compréhension commune de changement climatique, parce que les gens sont continuellement en adaptation, puis ont eux-mêmes mis en place des solutions pour s'adapter, avec de voir comment on peut bâtir à partir de ça, puis travailler ensemble. Rapidement, je dirais.
Merci beaucoup. Do we have someone who is from this side of the group? Ah.
Okay, so we were also part of the planning session. So there was a lot of talk about how to take care of both the donors' requirements and what really makes sense and what can bring added value to partners and communities on the ground, how to reconcile those 2 aspects, and how also to capture the qualitative data, quantitative data, that is the one that is mostly used to easily combine and showcase joint efforts, and also qualitative data that really speaks more to what changed really in the community's situation, and how it's hard also to have reliable qualitative data, not for say that it's not reliable, but how to convince people outside of the group that captured it that it is reliable. It's not as easy have that, that buy-in. Also the challenges that Project Life has in terms of M&E staff changing and bringing in new eyes that challenge what we decided before. But as we know, once a PMF is approved, there's not much we can change into that. So that's a good challenge. And then, so therefore, the need to have strong documentation of those decisions that are made at the initial inception process. And also how we need to find a way to have more room and make more time for the learning, because everybody does the M&E, and I think we do it rather well, but it doesn't translate so much into learning, at least not in one given project cycle. I think from project to project, we do learn, but within the life of one given project, the learning doesn't happen so much. So those were maybe our main takeaways. Thank you.
Thank you. And you can use this event to check off a little bit of the learning box.
Yes, for sure.
Am I able to put you on the spot? L'intégration de l'adaptation.
We're gonna talk now about the integration of the adaptation. Thank you. So for the, we said that we appreciated to have the resources that were shared on the climate vulnerability, but also the state of the biodiversity at the same time, in a time that was really close actually, and how, regarding the project we talked about, in not just in 4 countries, but in many areas where we were intervening, how we can use the adaptation. And also the strong points were how to think about the local partners. We had some input from the local government as to why and how work with them, and to work with them. And also we worked on the issues of the local populations regarding the adaptation to climate change. And I would add to that that if you have enough time, it's really great. If you don't have a lot of time, it's a real issue. So
I'm going to ask you to come up and, oh, Veronica to come up. Hold on.
No, you just missed, I think.
Oh, did I miss a group? Do we have? Sorry, my apologies. One online, the other online one. There were 3 online. 4. All right. I thought I got Ashley and Marie-Eve. Okay, I apologize. There you, of course.
You guys have heard enough from me by this point, but should I go?
Please
okay.
do.
So we were the group that was assessing like promising practices and lessons learned around developing a GESI strategy. So we talked a lot about the kind of concepts that a strategy typically needs to tackle and some of the kind of balancing acts that organizations have to address. So donor expectations around gender and how those actually shake out at the grassroots level and what that looks like, and balancing maybe targeting numbers of women versus what the real gender issues are and needing to be very context specific. And baking that into your assessment and into your work. The importance of having, and we've talked about this a lot today, having both policy and norms change components kind of addressed within your strategy so that we're looking at more of a systems level and this more of a transformative approach. We talked a bit about engaging with men and boys and decision makers, being able to identify champions within communities, the importance of making partnerships with either partners who are experts in this space, you know, smaller feminist grassroots organizations, or even organizations who are willing to learn and understand these concepts, who can then be the champions in that space locally in your program. We talked about some of the complexities which have already been measured or assessed around measuring things like choice, transformative change, how you can do that within the confines of something like a PMF and what that looks like. And I thought was really interesting, as a final comment, we talked about the importance of practicing what we preach. So thinking about how we can incorporate things like anti-racism, anti-oppression, training, decolonization training for folks so that they're actually practicing this in their everyday work. And it's not just, it's how we do the work, not just what we do. And so providing resources for implementing partners to be able to access that. Thanks.
Thank you, and my apologies for almost missing you. Okay, so, and one more, Flo.
Il y avait un dernier.
Vas-y. Okay.
So we had the biodiversity discussion with community buy-in. So we were asked about how do we plan for biodiversity co-benefits and how do we get buy-in for the communities. So we had a first comment that really summarizes most of our discussion. It was like the design of the initiatives has to be for them and by them. So to incorporate local indigenous knowledge systems and to have a co-development approach that isn't just from a perspective of an organization that goes to the country and imposes a project to the people. Also to recognize that knowledge and language is different from wherever you are in the world. So don't restrict to technical language and development jargon. So development language, so conservation, restoration might not be named the same, but it might end up to be the same activities in the end. And all those components have to be taught at the design of the project to really incorporate localization. But localization also takes time, so you have to organize within the constraints of time constraint that sometimes the funding organization might put on you. So you have to talk about the issues of people and create the project starting from that, and also to be able to create an enabling environment for people who will be able to sustain the learnings from the project. So don't just like have activities about agriculture, but also talk about the knowledge and give training sessions to people so they can perpetuate the learnings over time. And finally, to create ownership within your project, so to change the power dynamics so that organization become more a facilitator rather than a designer, and to also understand what level of governance should you influence through your project in order to have the bigger and the best impacts. So maybe it's not necessarily local governments, it can be national, international, so you can have the more lasting influence and impacts on your community for when you're gonna be gone.
Thank you. And is there another group?
Two online.
Two more online. Okay. Sorry, Jan. Go ahead.
That's all right. Thanks. Maybe just two quick highlights. One is that we were the integrating adaptation in NbS. And I'll just turn my camera off because I think I'm a little slow here.
No, you're fine.
Okay. So one was around, we talked about the lack of awareness and understanding or this and access to data in general, or if we did have access to data with poor quality data, or perhaps not disaggregated or site specific or any of those things. So that was a sort of a barrier, a challenge to how we can integrate adaptation. And on the solutions-based side of things, one idea put forward was about how by partnering with governments, with local governments that often house that data, may not be the highest quality, but we can still nonetheless do that and then help build up their data. So rather than reinventing wheels and recreating processes, we're being a bit more strategic about the resources we have to deploy in that context. And then we had a really robust conversation, lots of great ideas. And I'll just pull out one other one, which was around finding the entry point in communities and how that's incredibly critical to our work. And, especially if we're trying to reach our most vulnerable populations, that's essential. So an example put forward again was about the women's savings groups in communities being entry points to engage on NbS as well as on the GESI aspects of projects. And then also working with established projects and established community groups who become very important gateways to project socialization and onboarding of our initiatives. So just a couple of highlights from a really robust conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. And last but not least, please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour, je vais m'exprimer en français.
Nous étions 3 dans le
Hello, I'm
groupe.
gonna
Je vais
speak
focuser
French.
sur
We were
ce qui
3
n'a
in
pas
our
été dit.
group. I'm
Donc,
gonna
on a
focus on what
particulièrement
wasn't said.
discuté autour de
We
la
didn't
question
really
de
talk about
notre
the question
CMR, nos
of
indicateurs et
our
comment nos indicateurs peuvent
CMR
rendre compte
and
ou
our
non
indicators and how we
des
can
bénéfices reliés à l'augmentation ou
take
au
in
maintien de
account
la
how
biodiversité.
we
On est
can
arrivé à la conclusion que
represent
souvent nos
the
indicateurs de
biodiversity.
projet
We
ne
concluded that
rapportent pas ce
often
genre d'impact
the
ou ne
project
mesurent
indicators
pas
don't give us
l'amélioration, disons,
this kind of
de la
impact or don't
santé de
really
l'environnement
measure
ou de
the impact
l'écosystème,
of the
mais que le
on
projet
the health of the
projette en
environment or the
général
ecosystems,
d'inclure
but it's often a
un
project to
monitoring
include
ou un
some kind of
suivi
monitoring
à
or
travers
a follow-up
des groupes, des
through
comités
the committees or
communautaires pour
groups
évaluer
or
cet
community
impact-là.
groups
Donc,
to
ça peut être
confirm
fait
that
à travers
impact. So
de
really, it
l'observation
can be
des gens
done
qui
through
utilisent la
observation of the
ressource ou qui
people using the
la
resource
gèrent ou qui la
or people
protègent,
managing
mais
or
également,
protecting the resource.
on a
But
soulevé
also, we've
l'idée de
raised
pouvoir
the
utiliser
idea
certains
that
outils de
we can use some
compilation,
tools to
d'observation. On en a mis
observe
quelques-uns,
or compile
des initiatives de collecte de données
some
collectives,
points.
par
So we have
exemple, Community-Led
collective
Monitoring,
collective
e-Naturalist
community
App,
level
Marilyn
data
Burn Monitoring. Donc, et
data
la possibilité aussi
collection,
de réfléchir à en
and so the
créer pour
possibility
pouvoir
to
venir
reflect on how to create
évaluer un
this
petit peu
data
plus là,
to
l'impact au niveau
assess a bit more
environnemental
the impact, the environmental
des actions qui sont entreprises, puisque
impact
la plupart du
of
temps, nos
these
projets
projects and
ne sont pas
enterprises,
construits au
because
niveau du CMR
often
avec
these
des
projects are
indicateurs qui
not
focusent sur ça,
built
parce que les projets étant
at the
très
CMR
courts,
level
les indicateurs sont
with
plutôt
these indicators,
orientés
because
vers les
the
activités du
indicators
projet,
we are
distribution du nouveau
using are more
matériel,
oriented
utilisation,
towards
formation, nombre de
the
personnes qui mettent en
projects
application
that we are
des
using. So
nouvelles
like
approches,
the amount of
etc.
people that we
Donc,
are
en gros, là,
including and
dans les discussions qu'on
enriching,
a faites, ce qui
etc.
n'avait
So
pas été
what we
mentionné. Voilà.
in
Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
the summary we did,
Now I'll invite
it wasn't
Raju up.
mentioned.
We're going to do a Mentimeter discussion, and then I'll close things off so that you can get to the food and your families and the rest of your lives.
Thanks, Kerry. So we just like to go quickly into a Mentimeter survey to get perspective from, again, everyone who is still here as part of the community of practice. So really, we're using this opportunity to ask some direct questions about your views, your perspectives as regards to the COP and how it's framed and the structures and things along that line. So for those who are in the room, and if you have a separate device while you're joining virtually, you can scan the QR code, or you can go to menti.com, and the code to join the Mentimeter is displayed on the screen. So I'll just give a couple of seconds for people to sort of just navigate their way into the Mentimeter. Okay, I think we can move on to the first question. So here we're specifically asking from those of you who are a part of this session, how many of you are a member of the community of practice itself? Just to see where people are coming from. So a lot of people are members of this community of practice, but also a significant number of people, at least that have joined in so far, also saying no, but they would like to be. And if at any point in time you feel like you missed the instructions, the code is just displayed at the very top of the screen, so you can still log in at any point in time and giving your responses as we're going through the questions. Okay, we can move on to the next question. So here we're asking, what community of practice knowledge products, events are you interested in? Like, are there specific things that you're hoping to get out of being a part of the COP, or when you will be a part of this? So are you looking at peer learning? Are you looking for peer learning events? Are you looking for more hybrid events like today's one? Webinar sessions, maybe specific e-learning modules? Are you looking for blogs that you can refer to, or knowledge briefs. So I see there's a good split all across the board in terms of the different types of specific products or activities and resources that people hope to get out of being a part of this community of practice. So we'll move on to the next question. So specifically from the last one, if you had specified something else aside from the options that we're giving in terms of something that you're looking for, we would like for you to share with us, what exactly it is that's not an event or that's not an e-learning module, that's not a hybrid event or a knowledge brief. What else would you like to see that we may not already be thinking of, or maybe we are, but we just want to also sort of get a temperature check to see where other areas of opportunities in terms of collaboration and networking and building resources within the community of practice. So I'm seeing policy briefs as well. I'm guessing opportunities for collaboration, more discussion forums, field visits and study tours. I'm seeing common indicators like CanWatch, I believe that's what I'm seeing here, case studies, and COP in countries of, I think, implementing some of this nature-based solution practices. So thank you for sharing your feedback. I know the COP team is definitely taking all of this into consideration. And then we can go on to the next question. So specifically, what topics would you like to explore in future knowledge products or events? So are there specific areas of focus that you would like to see the COP delve a bit further into as it pertains to either the suggestions that you're giving from the previous two questions? So we just like to get an understanding of what are the specific areas that you would like to be focused on. So I'm seeing decolonization, some action, engaging the private sector, innovation, ecosystem-specific events, climate justice, scaling up, monitoring and evaluation and learning frameworks, research gaps. So definitely a variety of ideas that are coming through here. And we can move on to the final question for this portion, which is asking, what is one key takeaway from the COP sessions? I'm assuming that's referring to today. Yeah, or previous events that we've had. So what is one key takeaway from the COP sessions that have been had to date? So some things that you think were addressed, or things that you found that were working, or ideas or topics that you particularly learned from the previous sessions, sharing experiences I'm seeing as well, needing systemic change across all levels of systems, nature-based solutions, systems thinking, addressing communications barriers, creating a network. So I'm seeing a lot of system-related points being brought up. So thank you so much for giving us your feedback. Like I mentioned earlier, all of this information will be taken into consideration as the COP steering community continues to plan future activities and events. And I'll pass it back to Kerry to wrap us up for today.
Thanks, Uju. Conclusion et prochaine étape. Alors,
conclusion and next steps. I'm gonna remind you to put into your calendars from February 4th to 10th here in Ottawa, but also in hybrid mode. We're gonna have a full day about climate change. We're gonna have a part on the big issues, the big questions of the engagement of the $5.3 billion. I think there's going to be a part of a nature, and we're also going to participate as a practice committee.
International Development Week presentation of the community of practice, Graham Reed shared his research on Indigenous perspectives on nature-based solutions. And there was a real appetite to move more on that. So we will be focusing in February for our community of practice, the sort of the knowledge sharing part on that, on really deepening it, on looking at, perspectives on nature, perspectives on nature-based solutions, the whole fundamental challenge of, on the one hand, expressing appreciation of and the need for Indigenous knowledge, and on the other hand, actually using an entire approach and set of language and words that seem to be contrary to those values and those approaches. In addition, we'll have presentations from the IUCN on that NABSA project, the monitoring and evaluation for the global standards. And we will have, as Veronica mentioned, we'll have a COP vision statement at that point out. So we'll have part of that session where we'll have a chance to really do sort of some engagement on how to strengthen that, and we'll give the updates on steering committee and the such. I want to finish off by thanking a lot of people. First, AKFC and IISD, thank you so much for your efforts and your collaboration, and of course AKFC for this fantastic venue. To our techs and our translators and our caterers, thank you all very much for making this such a successful event. To the presenters, to the panelists, the facilitators, the rapporteurs, I think we had a really interesting set of conversations, and clearly we're going to have to do this. We're going to have like a sleepover component the next time so we can continue the conversations. To those of you in the room, but most importantly, I would say, because it's really the hardest job, for those of you online, thank you so much for sticking around, for participating. It's very much appreciated, and we really look forward to the next time. Alors, merci, bonne soirée, et il y a encore quelque chose à manger, et on a du temps à continuer à la discussion. Bonne soirée.